Maki Seiya experienced love at first sight the exact moment he watched Asahina eating her bento lunch in the classroom. Seiya directly stated his intention to confess his feelings to Asahina. His childhood friend looked up from his phone and expressed confused surprise. Seiya calmly repeated his desire to confess to Asahina while his friend pinched the bridge of his nose. The friend clarified if he meant their classmate, Asahina Arisa, and after Seiya confirmed, the friend pointed out that a confession was completely out of character for him. Listing Seiya's apathetic and careless traits, the friend questioned if he even understood what love was, to which Seiya admitted he probably did not. Looking serious, his friend asked what exactly made him want to confess in the first place. Seiya plainly explained that he just wanted to eat Asahina's lunch, reasoning that dating was the only logical way a stranger could get someone to make them food. His friend stared back in utter disbelief at this bizarre reasoning. The friend disagreed with how that process worked, but Seiya stubbornly insisted that he had to date her to get the lunch. Changing the subject, the friend asked what Seiya actually thought of Asahina as a person, but Seiya only replied that she was a girl who made lunches he wanted to eat. Pressing for more details, his friend asked what else he thought of her, prompting Seiya to merely add that she was in the same class. Seiya declared he was leaving to do it, but his friend quickly grabbed him by the collar and forced him to sit back down. Conceding the point about Seiya's strange motives, the friend asked how exactly he planned to execute the confession. Seiya stated he would simply find Asahina and confess, making his friend sigh heavily at the complete lack of a real plan. His friend mentally recalled rumors that Asahina had rejected numerous confessions before figuring she would naturally turn down Seiya since they had never even interacted. Realizing Seiya would not listen to reason anyway, his friend decided that facing a harsh reality rejection might be good for him and voiced his understanding. He pointed out that finding Asahina now was a long shot since she likely went home, suggesting Seiya try tomorrow or leave a letter, especially since Seiya had to go to his part-time job soon. The scene shifted to a closed door marked for the AV room. His friend looked up from his phone and asked if Seiya had actually gone through with it in the end. Their junior Sanami, Yui, entered the conversation and asked what they were talking about, prompting his friend to explain that Seiya was planning to confess to a girl in their class. Seiya confirmed that he had left a letter in the girl's shoebox, making Yui excitedly ask if he had used pretty paper for it. Seiya completely ruined the romantic mood by revealing he had used a plain brown envelope, causing his friend to angrily call him an idiot, while Yui recoiled in shock. Seiya innocently asked if using a brown envelope was a bad idea, and his friend confirmed with absolute seriousness that it was not good at all. Yui tried to look on the bright side by suggesting the brown envelope at least seemed sincere, while his friend asked Seiya what he had actually written in the letter. Seiya explained that he had written a simple request for her to meet him on the rooftop at exactly 5:15 after school, which his friend admitted sounded normal enough, even if Yui still felt the brown envelope ruined the vibe. Glancing at the clock, his friend noted that it was almost time and told Seiya to leave, adding that they would laugh at him if he got rejected. Seiya announced his departure and headed out the door, leaving his friend sitting alone in the room. Yui questioned if his friend was really fine with letting Seiya go just like that, asking if he would hate it if the confession was actually successful. Yui then smiled and brushed the concern off, noting that regardless of what happened, it would not change her own relationship with her senior. Left alone, his friend thought to himself that he really did not understand either Seiya or Yui at all. The scene transitioned to the exterior of the school's upper levels and rooftop under the late afternoon sky. Out on the fenced rooftop, Seiya walked up to Asahina and noted that she was already there waiting for him. Asahina turned to him with a bright smile, explaining that she had purposely tried to arrive 10 minutes early. Seiya casually pointed out that she was taking this very seriously, prompting Asahina to reply that it was weird hearing that from a person who handed out plain brown envelopes to his classmates. She admitted that the envelope method was indeed weird, but she confessed that she found it unique and appreciated the originality. Asahina then asked if someone had told him about her, which Seiya confirmed before she directly asked why he had called her to the rooftop. Staring at her with his usual deadpan expression, Seiya straightforwardly asked Asahina to go out with him. Asahina smiled kindly and thanked him, but immediately rejected his request to go out. When Seiya pointed out that she seemed entirely used to being confessed to, she humbly agreed that she probably experienced these situations more often than most people. Taking in her rejection, Seiya calmly replied that he understood and noted it was a shame. Unfazed by the outcome, Seiya directly asked Asahina why she had turned down his confession. Asahina explained that she was currently too focused on her immediate priorities to even think about love, adding that she felt he did not sound very confident in his confession anyway. Seiya bluntly admitted that he did not actually know her very well beyond the fact that they'd the same class, assuming she understood his reasoning now. Misunderstanding his point entirely, Asahina asked if he meant that he would want to go out with her only if he actually got to know her first. Asahina stared at him in tense silence. Seeing her hold her head, Seiya asked if she had a headache, which she quickly denied before cautiously asking if they had ever actually interacted with each other prior to this moment. Seiya confirmed they had not, prompting Asahina to point out that he still came to confess, meaning he must have liked something specific about her, to which he agreed. Feeling nervous, Asahina directly asked Seiya what exactly he liked about her. Seiya stated plainly that he liked her lunch, leaving Asahina utterly bewildered. Reaffirming his entirely food-driven motive, Seiya repeated that he liked her lunch, while Asahina stared at him in complete shock. Asahina stared back in wide-eyed disbelief, as the sheer absurdity of his words processed in her mind. She suddenly recalled a past incident where her classmates had discovered her severely burnt bento lunch, teasing her for leaving the stove on and messing up her cooking. Meanwhile, Seiya continued to stare at her with his usual blank, emotionless expression. Assuming he was mocking that embarrassing cooking failure, Asahina gritted her teeth in clear frustration. A loud slap suddenly echoed across the rooftop. Back inside the school, Seiya's friend and Yui stared forward in absolute speechless shock. Seiya sat before them holding a swollen bright red handprint on his cheek, casually reporting that Asahina had slapped him and that it had been painful. His friend pointed out that he did not even need to ask about the result, given Seiya's quick return and bruised face. Yui worriedly suggested Seiya visit the infirmary, and when Seiya thanked her while claiming he was fine, she flatly clarified that her pity was not a compliment. Yui sighed about the unfortunate outcome, and his friend advised Seiya to just give up and take the rejection as a good learning experience. However, Seiya immediately declared that he would not give up, leaving both of them completely startled. Seiya plainly restated his goal, declaring that he still just wanted to eat Asahina's lunch. Yui asked Seiya why he wanted to eat Asahina's lunch so badly, and if it actually looked that tasty, but his friend interjected that it looked like absolute garbage. His friend added that Seiya calling it garbage meant it must have been truly awful to break his usual character. Yui pointed out that he did not have to eat it if it looked so bad, but Seiya stubbornly insisted that he still wanted to eat it anyway. Observing Seiya's strange fixation, his friend thought to himself that he had never seen Seiya so attached to anything before, and suspected there had to be a deeper reason. Out loud, however, he simply agreed with Yui, noting that since Seiya had been rejected, there was nothing more to be done. Yui suddenly grew determined, declaring that since things had reached this point, they just needed to push forward and keep approaching Asahina until she finally gave in. She argued that as long as Seiya refused to give up, they could not just leave the situation alone. His friend completely disagreed, bluntly stating that Asahina had already said no, and that Seiya just needed to accept it. Refusing to back down, Seiya stated that he did not want to accept the rejection, causing his friend to groan in frustration at his stubbornness. Yui cheerfully pointed out Seiya's resolve, and announced to Su that it was time to come up with a strategy, though Su immediately tried to interrupt her. Su asked Seiya why he had gotten slapped in the first place, reasoning that he must have made Asahina furious, and questioning if Seiya had any idea what he did wrong. Yui nodded in agreement with Su's logic. Seiya admitted he did not know, explaining that when Asahina asked what he liked about her, he answered that he liked her lunch, which immediately resulted in him getting slapped. Both Su and Yui fell completely silent, staring at him, as they realized the sheer stupidity of his answer. Su concluded that Seiya had essentially stepped directly on a landmine. Yui lectured Seiya that from a woman's perspective, he was supposed to be careful about those kinds of sensitive topics, though she quickly shifted to muttering curses about Asahina instead. Yui noted that since Asahina was generally so good with people, she probably would not hold a lasting grudge over the incident. Su reluctantly agreed with her assessment. Fired up again, Yui concluded that they simply needed to push forward with their efforts. Seiya immediately agreed to do just that, while Su sighed and accused them both of speaking complete nonsense. Striking a confident pose, Yui declared herself a master of love who had strung along many men, promising to help Seiya and demanding he leave the situation to her. Su reminded her that they were dealing with a girl this time, but Yui countered that she was also a girl and could perfectly handle a woman's heart. She formally introduced herself as his new love guru, which Seiya politely accepted, making Yui internally fawn over his pure behavior. Su sighed heavily, stating he did not care about any of this nonsense. Undeterred, Yui began laying out her strategy, instructing Seiya to launch another love letter attack, but this time using pretty stationery to capture Asahina's heart, which Seiya dutifully wrote down in a notepad. As Yui continued rapid-firing her dating advice, Seiya nodded along and took meticulous notes while Su looked on with utter exhaustion. The scene shifted to an exterior view of a tall building against the evening sky. Inside an office, a manager smoking a cigarette checked a scheduling roster, noting to herself that both Seiya and Yui were scheduled to come in for their shift today. A man wearing glasses and a suit nervously entered the room, announcing a single male customer and noting it was not a branch introduction. The manager took a drag from her cigarette and asked for the customer's identity. When the suited man replied that his name was Tanaka, the manager angrily yelled that she did not care about his name. She clarified that she wanted to know who his nominated host was, making the man stammer awkwardly, while she silently grumbled about how frustrating newcomers could be. She ordered the man to wait where he was while she went to handle the situation. Yui and Seiya suddenly arrived, with Yui cheerfully announcing their return to the manager. Relieved by their arrival, the manager silently noted that things were easier with them around, observing that with only one guest present, it was just another slow day. She then asked Yui and Seiya who the customer was. Peeking into the room, Yui replied that the man called himself Tanaka, but admitted she had never seen his face before, guessing he might have heard rumors about their club online. The manager dismissively brushed the detail off. Yui then turned to Seiya and scolded him, assuming he had been rude to the customers again, but Seiya ignored her and called out to the manager. The manager told Yui not to worry, stating that their customers were jerks anyway, and that people would come and go as they pleased. Realizing her mistake, Yui apologized to Seiya just as he handed the manager a fresh ashtray. Looking down at the clean ashtray, the manager silently noted that Seiya was a quick-witted kid. Yui stood nearby, watching with a warm smile on her face. The manager thanked Yui for her help. Yui gladly accepted the gratitude, adding that she would be ready to work right after she finished helping her senior. As Yui and Seiya chatted casually, the manager observed them and noted how close the two of them really were. The manager mused that it would be a lovely scene between the two teenagers if they were not currently standing in a host club. In a flashback, a young Asahina sat alone on a sandy beach, staring out at the ocean waves while recalling her past. An older man sat beside her, carefully packing wet sand between his hands as he called out Asahina's name. The man explained to her that it was much easier to dig the sand using a shovel, and that wetting the sand prevented the wind from blowing it all away. As the man stood up and looked out at the water, young Asahina sat on the ground, quietly wiping tears from her eyes. While tears continued to stream down Asahina's face, a woman's voice called out to her, telling her not to cause trouble for her father. The woman's voice continued instructing Asahina not to cause trouble for the man as they stood together on the beach. Asahina slowly opened her eyes as she woke up from the distant memory. She sat up in bed and stared down quietly in the morning light. Grunting softly, Asahina stretched her arms up before pulling her curtains wide open. She then sat down at her vanity desk and stared blankly at her reflection in the mirror. Walking past a maid who bowed and wished her a good morning, Asahina returned the greeting and thanked her for preparing breakfast. Outside her home, Asahina climbed into the back seat of a waiting black luxury car. She sat quietly in the passenger seat with a tired expression as the vehicle arrived at her high school. Inside the school building, Asahina walked up to her shoe locker and pulled the door open. She paused in surprise when she spotted a cute envelope with a cat seal resting directly on top of her shoes inside the locker. Reading the note inside, which stated that the sender would be waiting for her on the rooftop, she immediately assumed it was from Seiya. She quickly shoved the letter into her school bag. She mentally criticized the letter for lacking a sender's name or a specific meeting time, feeling he was getting way too comfortable just before a classmate called out her name. Asahina instantly put on a friendly smile and exchanged morning greetings with her classmates, with one girl mentioning she was counting on her for physical education class today. Her friendly facade dropped internally as she thought about Seiya, wondering what was up with his weird love letter after yesterday's incident, and complaining about how much of her time he was taking up. Sighing to herself, she reasoned that if he was not serious, he should just spend his time elsewhere, wondering how many more tricks he planned to pull right before someone called her name again. Asahina was completely startled to find Seiya standing directly in front of her, offering a simple morning greeting which she hesitantly returned. Seiya then simply walked past her in complete silence, leaving Asahina confused and internally admitting that his sudden appearance had scared her. A female classmate approached Asahina and asked if she was close to Seiya, expressing surprise, since she had never seen him actively talk to anyone besides his friend Tezuka before. Asahina quickly brushed the question off by pointing out they were just classmates greeting each other, while the other girl teased that she thought the usually unapproachable Asahina had finally found a boyfriend. Asahina laughed off the teasing, explaining she was not ready for something like a boyfriend yet. Her classmate then announced that homeroom was starting and told everyone to take their seats. During class, the teacher called on Asahina and instructed her to solve an equation on the blackboard. Asahina finished writing her answer on the board and announced she was done. The teacher confirmed her work, stating she had solved it correctly. Asahina walked back to her seat as her classmates chattered lightly, with one student playfully complaining to the teacher. As she walked, Asahina flinched when she noticed Seiya resting his chin on his hand and staring directly at her with a blank expression. As she kept walking, she internally noted that Seiya was still watching her, wondering if she was simply being overly self-conscious about the situation. Back at her desk, Asahina was startled when she accidentally dropped her eraser, and someone immediately reached down to pick it up. Seiya held the cat-themed eraser out to her, plainly stating that she had dropped it. Asahina awkwardly thanked him. The teacher then instructed the class to form pairs, and a female classmate immediately approached Asahina to ask if they could partner up. Seiya suddenly slid in between them and told Asahina to pair up with him, pulling out a paper and handing it to her. Asahina felt completely overwhelmed by Seiya's constant blank staring from every direction. Later, Seiya stood directly beside her at a vending machine as she bought some water. Sweating in disbelief, Asahina internally panicked, questioning if this relentless hovering was actually how a rejected guy was supposed to act. Completely exhausted by the ordeal, Asahina slumped face down onto her desk, mentally noting that his behavior was entirely too abnormal. Nearby classmates whispered about Seiya being strangely nice, admitting they could not understand him. One classmate asked Asahina what was going on, guessing it was about her burnt lunch from last time, causing Asahina to twitch in irritation. Unable to take it anymore, Asahina abruptly slammed her hands on her desk and stood up, severely startling her classmates, as she decided to just leave the classroom for now. Asahina walked down the quiet school stairwell until she noticed a sound and paused to look around. She completely stopped her steps on the stair landing. Another set of shoes immediately halted right behind her own. A nervous sweat broke out across Asahina's face as she realized who it was. Shuddering in fear, she slowly turned around to find Seiya standing directly behind her on the steps, staring back with his usual blank expression. Asahina backed away in terror, tearing up, as Seiya continued to step toward her with an unwavering blank expression. Pushed to her limit, she frantically screamed at him, asking what he wanted from her. Seiya calmly explained that his love master had told him to run to Asahina's aid whenever she was in trouble. This left Asahina utterly baffled as she questioned what a love master even was and why he was following such messy advice. Echoing across the sky, Asahina screamed at him at the top of her lungs to just leave her alone. Some time passed. The scene shifted back to the closed door of the AV room. Inside, Yui brought up Seiya to Sue, mentioning that he had gone to confess again, which Sue casually confirmed without looking up from his book. Sue questioned if Asahina was even okay, since Seiya's persistent approaches were happening every single day now. But Yui excitedly argued that a girl having a hard time was actually a convenient opportunity to swoop in. The classroom door suddenly slammed open, revealing a heavily panting Asahina standing in the doorway, while Sue and Yui stared in shock. Looking absolutely furious and exhausted, Asahina glared forward and menacingly addressed the two of them. Her voice rang out over the entire school building as she screamed that she had had enough of their antics. Panting heavily, Asahina stood in the room with Yui and Sue when Seiya suddenly walked in right behind her. Asahina furiously pointed at Yui, demanding to know if she was the one who made Seiya do all those crazy things and asking what was wrong with her. When Seiya blankly asked Asahina if she was okay, she angrily snapped at him to stop speaking. Yui nervously explained that she was only helping Seiya approach her because he was interested, but Asahina exploded, yelling that following her around school all day was terrifying. She added that the weird letter in her shoe locker had ruined her morning, berating Yui for calling herself a love master, before whipping around to glare directly at Sue. She accused Sue of helping them as well, demanding to know why he did not stop them. Sue defended himself by stating he had already tried, but Asahina screamed at him to try harder, to which Sue plainly pointed out that Seiya never listened to anything he said anyway. Asahina stared back with dark heavy bags under her severely stressed eyes. Taking a large gulp from her water bottle, she took a moment to mentally tell herself to calm down. Regaining her composure, Asahina apologized for her outburst. Sue expressed sympathy that the last few days had been so tough for her and noted he was glad they could finally talk it out. Sue then told Asahina that she would simply have to tolerate the two of them, explaining that Seiya did not actually mean any harm, while Yui nervously hid behind Seiya's back. Sighing in defeat, Asahina conceded that it was fine now, but she firmly demanded that Seiya stop following her around because it genuinely made her feel scared and uncomfortable. Seiya, Sue, and Yui all bowed their heads and formally apologized to Asahina, prompting her to let out a sigh of relief. Yui sadly asked what the point of all their efforts even was, while Seiya and Sue stood silently beside her. Asahina pointed out that trying to hit on her with those terrifying tactics was just a prank in incredibly poor taste. Sue attempted to clarify the situation, but Seiya plainly interrupted to state that he only did it because he wanted to eat Asahina's lunch. A heavy silence fell over the group as Asahina stared at him in utter disbelief. Seiya firmly repeated his singular desire to eat her lunch. Asahina's eyes spiraled as the sheer absurdity of his motive fully registered in her mind. The loud sound of another harsh slap echoed across the sky. The scene transitioned to the exterior of the school building on another day. Arriving at school, Asahina opened her shoe locker and smiled in relief upon finding nothing unusual inside. She closed the locker door and let out a calm sigh. Seiya suddenly appeared right beside her and offered a simple morning greeting. Asahina returned the greeting with an exhausted expression, internally deciding to just completely forget about his pushy behavior from the previous days. A female classmate suddenly approached Asahina and asked if the rumors about Seiya stalking her were true, mockingly adding that Asahina had been running around screaming like a weirdo earlier. Forcing a polite smile, Asahina internally cringed that other people had witnessed her embarrassing outburst. Asahina explained that it was all a big misunderstanding, and that Seiya was merely trying to return a lost item to her, which the classmate accepted with a highly skeptical look. The classmate rudely admitted she thought Asahina was just running around like an idiot to avoid a guy she had recently dumped. Maintaining her bright fake smile, Asahina firmly clarified that was not the case, and told the girl she could keep her fake worries to herself. Asahina internally fumed, feeling deeply angry at the people who constantly tried to pick fights with her as well as at herself. She stomped her foot down in frustration. She turned away and marched up the school stairwell alone. Reaching the rooftop, she looked out at the open sky as the wind blew past. Asahina thought about how much she liked the blue sky, feeling like it could let her fly anywhere and leave all the things she hated behind, but her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when a familiar voice called her name, making her stop in her tracks. Seiya stood before her and calmly noted that she was there. A flustered Asahina demanded to know why he was on the roof, to which Seiya plainly explained that he had come straight there right after greeting her earlier that morning. The two of them stood far apart near the chain-link fence in total silence. Seiya stared blankly ahead, while Asahina nervously glanced over at him from the corner of her eye. Finding the silence completely awkward, Asahina internally decided she should just go back inside since they weren't even talking. Just then, Seiya suddenly broke the silence to ask if she was all right. Asahina defensively asked why he was asking that, and Seiya bluntly pointed out that she had obviously come to the rooftop because she did not feel comfortable down in the classroom. Her eye twitching in irritation, Asahina forced a strained smile and sarcastically wondered out loud whose fault that was. Seiya genuinely asked if it was weird for him to talk to her in front of her classmates. Asahina bluntly clarified that it severely stood out when a known problem child like him talked to her. Mildly surprised by this realization, Seiya plainly accepted her point and apologized. Asahina internally noted that his overly blunt attitude was exactly what kept causing problems for her. Out loud, she expressed relief that he finally understood and announced she was heading back inside first. Asahina vividly recalled building a pile of sand on the beach that would inevitably wash away no matter how high it was piled, resolving internally that she never wanted to be like such a fragile mound. Thinking back to the older man from her past, Asahina decided she would rather be flexible enough to flow with any situation while still remaining the kind of dependable person everyone needed. She firmly declared to herself that her single greatest wish was to become a fully respectable adult. Tightly clenching her uniform skirt, she fiercely maintained that she wanted nothing else, noting that absolutely nothing good ever happened whenever she got involved with Seiya. A sudden high-pitched screeching sound pierced the air. Back inside the school, Sue let out a massive yawn. Sue glanced back at Seiya, noticing that he was quietly dozing off by the window. Sue thought to himself that Seiya had not been explicitly approaching or following Asahina lately, wondering if the whole ordeal would simply end as if nothing had happened. Watching him sleep, Sue reflected that it was rare to see Seiya so obsessed with something like Asahina's lunch. Sue then looked over at Asahina, wondering what she actually thought of Seiya now, just as the teacher suddenly called out Sue's last name, Tezuka, and ordered him to stand up. Sue stood up from his desk and confusedly asked what the teacher wanted. The teacher sighed and pointed out that Sue had been looking away during class, noting that he had already given him a lot of leeway. The teacher then directed his attention to the sleeping Seiya, warning both of them that they could not just keep going on like this. Sue begrudgingly accepted the reprimand, though he internally complained that other students were also sleeping. Later, Sue quickly tapped out a message on his phone keyboard. After exchanging brief texts about not wanting to drag Sue into things, Sue sent a message asking if the sender was done with Asahina, causing a phone to buzz in response. Fingers quickly tapped out a reply on the phone screen. Sue watched in surprise as Seiya immediately replied, wondering if his friend was a robot. Seiya's message explained that he did not know if he was done with Asahina, as she had told him. It stood out when a problem child like him talked to her, leaving him unsure of what to do. Sometime later, Yui cheerfully called out a greeting as Sue walked into the room carrying a lunch bag. Opening his bento box, Yui commented that he always made delicious-looking meals that completely contrasted with his face, which Sue flatly called rude. Yui laughed and teased Sue for always eating his spinach first, despite being a punk, and Sue sarcastically apologized for being perfectly healthy while chewing his food. Yui suddenly noticed Seiya arriving at the doorway. Yui urgently gestured for Seiya to sit down with them. Seiya thanked her and took a seat, prompting Yui to ask what he had brought for lunch. Seiya pulled out 2 plain packaged bread rolls from his bag. Sue pointed out that Seiya needed to eat more than just 2 bread rolls, but Seiya completely missed the point. By explaining that these specific rolls were cheaper making, Sue clarified that he was not talking about the flavors or cost. Seiya simply reiterated his desire to eat Asahina's lunch, while Yui quietly offered him a piece of her own food. Yui offers Seiya a portion of her lunch because he helped her the day before, but Seiya politely declines. Sue then offers Seiya a piece of his own food, but Seiya refuses once again, explaining that he does not want to take anything when he has nothing to offer in return. Sue tells Seiya to just take the food, but Seiya stubbornly refuses, prompting Sue to complain about his stubbornness, while Yui urges her senior to just accept it. Yui teasingly remarks that Sue is just desperate to brag about his cooking hobby, and that Seiya should just take it, which makes an embarrassed Sue tell them both to stop. Sue sarcastically bows and thanks Yui for her exaggerating praise, before telling Seiya to hurry up and eat his food. Sue then takes Seiya's bread roll and places his own meat inside it, while Seiya watches him in silent surprise. While Seiya eats the cramped-looking bread roll, Sue suddenly remembers and asks if Seiya has to go to his part-time job today. Seiya replies that he is going to visit his mother today instead, prompting Sue to gulp down his food and decide that he will go along with him. Seiya silently munches on his bread before quietly agreeing to let Sue accompany him. Later that day, a heavy rain begins to pour down outside. Under the heavy downpour, Seiya and Sue walk side by side with umbrellas toward a large hospital building. They arrive at the entrance of the hospital, where the rain continues to splash against the glass doors. As they enter, Seiya looks thoughtful and silently wonders to himself what kind of food his own mother used to cook for him. In a flashback to their childhood, Sue recalls how Seiya's family always made him feel at home, remembering a time they were served cute, bear-shaped snacks. Sue remembers how he used to go to Seiya's house every day to play and help out with the housework, washing and rinsing dishes together alongside Seiya's mother. Returning to the present, they stand in the hospital corridor outside room 805, which is labeled with the name Maki Kotoko. Sue reflects that those warm childhood memories were all a very long time ago as Seiya knocks on the door and quietly calls out to his mother. Inside the room, Seiya's mother lies silently in her hospital bed, still attached to medical equipment, while staring out the window. The chapter draws to a close with a stark close-up view of his mother's exhausted and solemn face. Seiya notes that his mother has been awake, and she tiredly responds that she should not be. Seiya tells his mother that her physical condition is looking better, but she trails off to correct him. She suddenly throws a magazine straight at Seiya's face with a loud thud. She furiously screams, asking what kind of idiot tells a sick person that they look good, while Sue worriedly asks Seiya if he is all right, as Seiya clutches his face. She continues to vent her frustration, shouting that she spends the entire day lying there and accusing him of looking down on her. Seiya quietly apologizes, but his mother quickly turns her anger towards Sue as well. She demands to know why Sue always tags along since the situation is none of his business, and they are not even related, prompting Sue to reply that he couldn't care less. She shifts her attention back to Seiya, saying she hopes he is making good money at his job. And when Seiya confirms that the pay is good, she simply replies that it is great. She brutally tells Seiya that she has no use for him then and orders them to go home, which causes a frustrated Sue to tightly clench his fist. Seiya quietly agrees and tells her to take care of herself, prompting his mother to angrily scream at them to shut up and leave. The hospital room door slides shut behind them, and Sue silently turns to look at Seiya. Sue fiercely grips the handle in silent frustration over how Seiya was treated. Sue places a hand on Seiya's shoulder and gently tells him that they should go. Walking down the corridor, Seiya apologizes to Sue for making him wait, but Sue casually tells him not to sweat it. Sue apologizes and explains that he needs to stop by somewhere first, telling Seiya to go on ahead without him, and Seiya calmly agrees. Sue walks off into the wet streets alone, taking decisive steps through the rain. Sue ends up sitting alone on a park bench, looking deeply downcast as the rain pours down around him. He remembers a warm memory of Seiya's mother from their childhood, when she had kindly apologized for not having more money, wishing Seiya and Sue could be real brothers and welcoming Sue to visit them as family anytime. Sue wonders to himself what the right thing to do actually was, though he tries to brush it off by telling himself that he does not care. He looks ahead somberly, silently reflecting on the harsh reminder that he is not actually related to them after all. Several weeks later, the scene shifted back to the school building under a cloudy sky. Outside the AV room, someone approached and asked Seiya and his companion if they were studying. Yui and Sue sat at the desk, clearly holding playing cards in their hands instead of studying materials. Seiya directly asked if they were studying for the midterm exams this semester, prompting Yui to hold her head and claim she did not understand him while jokingly asking him to speak in Japanese. While Yui collapsed onto the desk in despair, Sue held up a peace sign and asked Seiya how he did, to which Seiya confirmed he had also taken his exams. Yui exclaimed in shock that she had scored only 2 points in all subjects, but Sue immediately brushed it off and noted that she was completely free now. Yui abruptly sprang back up and declared that they could still fight and were just getting started, though Seiya flatly told her that it was all over and not to jinx it. Seiya scratched his head in frustration and stated that he would just have to look after both of them starting today to get it over with, which Sue casually accepted while wondering if that was really all right. Yui suddenly got an idea and enthusiastically suggested that Seiya ask Asahina to join their study session, but Seiya plainly stated that Asahina would not come, reminding them that they already knew why. Seiya reasoned that someone would not normally ask for help from a person who had slapped them twice, while Sue quietly hummed and recalled Asahina mentioning that it stood out when a problem child talked to her. Yui cheerfully patted Seiya on the head and confidently told both of her seniors not to worry about those details. Yui analyzed the situation, pointing out that Asahina only disliked being followed for no reason and had never explicitly told Seiya not to get her involved, concluding that Seiya just needed a specific valid reason to talk to her. Wasting no time, Yui immediately shoved Sue toward the door, urging both of them to hurry and go for it right now, while cheering them on to do their best. Yui excitedly celebrated to herself that she had successfully sent them off, but she suddenly froze when Seiya unexpectedly asked if she was glad she was not spending more time with the senior she loved. Flustered and shaking slightly, Yui quickly tried to cover up her reaction by claiming it was fine, and that a wife should allow a little bit of cheating, which made Seiya quietly note her strange choice of words. Yui loudly insisted that she was doing great and was just feeling a little sick, prompting Seiya to question why she would say that out loud and advising her to worry about her own test scores instead. Turning her back with a dark, intense aura, Yui admitted that she did not want Sue to go either, but felt she had no choice if it was what he wanted, spinning around with spiraling eyes to declare it was all an investment to get his love later. The scene transitioned back outside to a view of the cloudy sky. Someone was shown walking quietly up the school stairwell. A hand firmly pushed the rooftop door open. A boy with black hair approached Asahina on the rooftop, calling out her name while she stood facing the chain-link fence. Asahina replied, gently thanking him for coming. A pair of feet in school shoes stood firmly on the ground. The boy called out Asahina's name while she stood silently in profile. Asahina turned around to face the freckled boy, politely thanking him for coming. The freckled boy stood before her looking incredibly nervous with a heavy blush on his cheeks. Gathering his courage, the boy confessed that he had liked her for a long time, nervously adding that he was not great at studying or sports, but asking if they could go out. The boy immediately looked completely shocked when Asahina bluntly apologized, rejecting his confession. Putting on a warm, polite smile, Asahina explained that she was too busy taking care of her own things right now, adding that she did not know him very well, and he likely did not know her much better either. Desperate to salvage the situation, the boy quickly interrupted, insisting it was not like that, and arguing that even though they were in different classes, he still knew about her. As the boy claimed he knew how kind she was, Asahina silently thought to herself that he was lying. The boy continued to praise her passionately, stating that she treated everyone equally and calling her a great person. As he continued speaking, Asahina's internal voice coldly repeated that he was lying. While the boy smiled brightly and called her very kind, Asahina silently concluded that he had been lying this entire time. Asahina firmly apologized again and told him that she did not think she was actually like that, leaving the boy completely stunned, while she internally noted that anyone who actually understood her would never confess to her. Following the rejection, Asahina stood alone on the upper landing as the rooftop door clicked shut behind her. As she walked down the steps, she mentally went over her schedule, noting that she had piano practice since it was Thursday and needed to review for her midterms later. Walking down the empty school hallway, her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when a familiar voice called out her name from behind. Asahina called out to Seiya and asked him what he wanted. Seiya asked if she could help him study, which prompted a confused reaction from Asahina. Asahina asked why he wanted her help and explained that she had lessons today, to which Seiya simply replied that it was a shame. Seiya then directly asked her if that was fine. Asahina hesitantly agreed before confusedly asking what he meant. Seiya pointed out that if she had lessons, she should not still be at school. Asahina stammered, realizing she had stayed behind because someone asked her to meet them on the roof. Seiya plainly remarked that it sounded tough, prompting her to continue. Looking distressed, Asahina muttered about the person who confessed to her, questioning why he had done it. She internally questioned why she was even telling Seiya this before saying out loud that the boy had told her she was kind. Asahina started to speak again but hesitated. Seiya bluntly asked her if she actually wanted to be a kind person. Asahina stood frozen in place, her body trembling slightly. She hesitantly stated that if someone wanted to be considered kind. Seiya interrupted, stating he didn't think she actually had to become kind, advising her that she just needed to use her imagination positively. Clenching her arm tightly, Asahina argued that doing so was essentially just cheating. Seiya reasoned that if she thought of it as cheating and wanted to change, then she was already perfectly fine the way she was. Seiya plainly affirmed that he was sure she was already a kind person, leaving Asahina staring back in complete shock. Asahina silently reflected on how she had been pretending to be kind to people in the hopes that she might one day actually become kind. Visibly distressed, Asahina argued that she couldn't be kind since she had said things that hurt him when he confessed. She internally noted that she should have felt happy, but only felt distant, wondering aloud how she could possibly be considered kind. Seiya calmly pointed out that if she weren't truly kind, she wouldn't be worrying so much about having hurt other people in the first place. Seiya calmly told Asahina that she was a person who got hurt whenever she hurt others. Asahina stared back in silence as tears quickly welled up in her eyes, struggling to find her words. Feeling completely overwhelmed, Asahina internally panicked about what kind of face she was making right now, while Seiya stood by blankly as she stammered in confusion. Abruptly deciding she needed to leave immediately, Asahina spun around and loudly announced she was going home, quickly bidding Seiya goodbye. As she sprinted down the hallway, Asahina frantically listed off all the things she needed to do, like grabbing her bag and heading to her lessons, while mentally reaffirming that getting involved with Seiya was a terrible idea. She continued to run, panting heavily from the sudden rush. Despite her frantic thoughts, a gentle, genuine smile formed on Asahina's face as tears continued to shine in her eyes. The scene transitioned to a view of the cloudy sky. Elsewhere in the host club office, a woman wearing glasses and a suit walked through the door as the smoking manager lazily welcomed her and noted her arrival. Looking deadly serious, the woman with glasses intensely asked if he was there. The manager replied that he was not there yet, prompting the suited woman to nervously grip her bag as she prepared to make a request. The suited woman firmly declared that she wanted to take him in, but the manager flatly rejected the idea, clarifying that they did not do that kind of business there and ordering her to leave. Refusing to back down, the woman yelled that she had enough money and promised to pay it all herself little by little. The manager sighed and asked how much money the woman actually made, bluntly assuring her that the boy made significantly more than her, and there was no financial reason to ever let him go. The door suddenly swung open, and Seiya announced his return, causing the suited woman to gasp in surprise as the manager paused. The suited woman blushed heavily and softly called out Seiya's name while the manager bowed and formally welcomed the woman, addressing her as Mizuki. Mizuki grabbed Seiya's sleeve as the manager instructed Seiya to go with her, which he dutifully accepted. Seiya stood close to Mizuki and smoothly told her that he had missed her while she was gone, leaning directly into her ear to whisper that he loved her. Mizuki looked completely flustered and enamored by his words, while the manager watched the routine exchange from the side with an utterly deadpan expression. Seiya maintained his completely blank, emotionless stare as he leaned intimately against the blushing woman. The manager took a drag from her cigarette, silently repeating the sweet words Seiya had just told the woman. Watching Seiya walk down the hall with his arm warmly wrapped around Mizuki, the manager thought to herself that Seiya was just doing whatever he wanted. Seiya bluntly told Asahina that he did not actually like her because he already had other women. The next day at school, Asahina called out to Seiya from behind while he was sitting at his desk. Seiya turned around and asked what she wanted while Asahina stood there looking noticeably nervous. Stammering slightly, Asahina reminded Seiya that he had asked her to help him study, and suggested they could do it today, quickly adding that it was completely fine if he didn't want to anymore. Seiya calmly agreed, and politely asked her to take care of him, causing Asahina to break into a bright, relieved smile as she accepted. Her cheerful mood restored, Asahina told Seiya that she would see him after school. Sue suddenly called out to Asahina, prompting her to turn around and ask him what he needed. Sue nervously asked if she was really okay with teaching Seiya. Asahina reassured him that it was fine since she didn't have anything to do at home and was already planning to review her own material anyway. Concluding the conversation, Asahina promised to return later and walked away, leaving Sue to confusedly wonder to himself what had happened to her. Sue turned to Seiya and asked what he had done to make her act so differently from yesterday. Seiya explained that, when he had asked her to help him study, she looked worried, so he simply talked to her. Sue casually accepted the explanation, expressing gladness over the positive outcome, while playfully cursing Seiya for always managing to pull off a nice face. Sue enthusiastically suggested they go to the AV room as soon as class was over. When Seiya noted that Sue looked happy and asked if something good had happened, Sue aggressively denied caring about it, which Seiya calmly accepted. Later, the AV room door slid open. Inside, Yui turned around from her Japanese textbook and cheerfully welcomed them back. Sue immediately scolded Yui, pointing out she had promised to finish her work yesterday. Yui frantically began scribbling in her book, claiming she was doing it right now, though Sue sighed and noted she had only started 5 minutes ago. Changing the subject, Yui eagerly asked if everything had gone well with Asahina. Seiya confirmed that she was coming later, prompting Yui to excitedly ask what he had told her to make that happen. Sue explained that she had flatly refused yesterday, but Seiya added that she had agreed earlier today. Sue noted that Asahina was speaking softly during their conversation, concluding that something about her attitude had fundamentally changed. Yui excitedly asked if Seiya had used his finishing move on Asahina, completely ignoring Sue's confusion about even having a finishing move. Just as Yui praised the supposed move as amazing, the classroom door slid open. Asahina entered the room carrying her study materials and politely excused herself. Yui gasped in surprise while Seiya smiled warmly and expressed his gladness that Asahina had come. Seiya quickly offered Asahina a seat at the desk, which she accepted with a quiet thanks, while Yui and Sue watched the interaction closely. Seiya playfully asked if she was nervous, causing Asahina to blush heavily and loudly insist that she was not. Seiya laughed and sarcastically replied that he totally believed her, making Asahina sulk and firmly repeat her denial while Yui giggled beside them. Yui let out a smug hum, completely amused by the exchange. Sue glanced at her and silently confirmed to himself that Asahina's attitude had indeed changed. Asahina sat down and immediately began tutoring Seiya, instructing him to substitute the expression while he hummed in agreement, and Sue quietly observed them from the side. Looking over the scattered textbooks and study notes, Sue thought to himself that whatever the reason for her change of heart was, it ultimately did not matter. As the study session progressed, Asahina diligently pointed out corrections in the textbook, while a flustered Seiya laughed off her strict scolding, all while Sue continued to watch the two of them interact. The scene shifted to a view of the cloudy late afternoon sky. Closing her math textbook, Asahina announced that she thought they had done enough studying for today, which Sue calmly agreed with. Sue looked over at Asahina as they finished wrapping up their study session. Seiya brightly thanked Asahina, noting that she had helped them out a lot. Yui chimed in with her own enthusiastic thanks, making a flustered Asahina awkwardly try to downplay her contribution. Asahina defensively clarified that she had only come to help, because they asked her to, insisting it was not something they needed to be so grateful for, prompting Seiya to let out a light chuckle. Looking away nervously, Asahina offered to teach them again if she found some free time, quickly stammering that it would only happen if she actually had the time to spare. Sue offered a gentle smile and sincerely told her that her offer made him happy, thanking her again for the help. Asahina stared back in mild surprise, taken aback by Sue's warm and genuine expression. Sue casually brushed it off by saying it was no problem, silently thinking to himself that this new dynamic between them was not so bad either, as Asahina and Seiya watched him. Later that evening, Asahina sat alone on her bed in her room. Blushing softly, Asahina tightly squeezed a pillow against her chest, quietly rationalizing to herself that she had only helped him study, and that they had not even talked that much. Asahina recalled the feeling of studying alongside Seiya, picturing his hand holding a pencil over their notes. Blushing deeply with her heart pounding in her chest, Asahina wondered to herself why the experience felt so intense. Burying her face into her pillow, as her heart continued to race, she remembered Seiya's steady gaze and struggled to process her own feelings. She gripped her pillow even tighter, her eyes watering and her face completely flushed. She thought back to Seiya's words when he had gently told her that she was the kind of person who got hurt whenever she hurt others. Thrashing around on her bed in pure embarrassment, Asahina mentally berated herself, questioning if she was really so easy to win over just because of that one single comment. Lying back and staring up at the ceiling, she finally admitted to herself that it still made her incredibly happy that he had truly accepted her. She reflected that Seiya actually understood her, realizing that he knew she genuinely wanted to be a kind person despite her flaws. Hugging her pillow closely, Asahina felt deeply moved that Seiya had noticed something beautiful about her that she hadn't even recognized in herself. But her thoughts were suddenly interrupted when a voice called out to her. A maid called out from behind the bedroom door to announce that the master of the house had returned, causing Asahina to jump up in surprise and quickly confirm that she was present. A tense silence settled over Asahina as the heavy reality of her father's arrival set in. Promising the maid that she was coming, Asahina stood quietly in front of her full-length mirror as her digital clock clicked to 6 in the evening. As she carefully adjusted her uniform collar, Asahina tried to remember the last time she had actually seen her father, wondering if it had been 3 months, or perhaps even longer. She smoothed down her hair to ensure she looked completely presentable before leaving her room. Staring at her reflection with a stern, rigid expression, Asahina firmly clenched her fist. She took a deep, steadying breath to calm her nerves. Mentally telling herself she was ready, she approached the slightly open double doors of the dining room. Asahina reminded herself of the strict rules she had to follow, reciting that she needed to tidy herself up, keep her head high, and be the perfect daughter who never caused her father trouble. She recalled a harsh past memory of a ruined, burnt lunchbox, silently reinforcing the painful belief that a daughter who could not even make a proper meal for her father was completely unimportant. Sitting at the far end of a massive, lavishly set dining table, Asahina silently waited until her father finally acknowledged her and called out her first name. Looking at her from across the long table with a polite but distinctly distant expression, her father simply told her that she looked great. Asahina tightly hugged her pillow and thought to herself about how nice Seiya was being to her, secretly hoping he was not already dating someone else. Her father complimented Asahina, telling her that she looked great. Asahina awkwardly returned the compliment, telling her father that he looked great as well. Bringing up her upcoming exams, her father asked Asahina if she was doing well with her studies. Asahina assured him that she planned to study some more after they finished eating, which her father was glad to hear. Her father smiled and expressed his hope that she would reach first place this time. Forcing a polite smile, Asahina agreed with him before her expression darkened in silent tension. Their conversation was interrupted when her father's phone rang, prompting him to stand up and excuse himself to take the call. Left alone at the table, Asahina thought about how her father had already started a business overseas when he was her age, while she could not even manage to get first place on her school exams. Her father returned and apologized for interrupting her meal, while Asahina silently wondered what he actually thought of her. Asahina quickly assured him that it was fine as he took his seat across from her. Noticing his serious demeanor, Asahina asked if something was wrong, to which he simply called out her name. Her father apologized for not making the time to spend with her lately. Surprised by his apology, Asahina forced a bright smile and frantically assured him that she was completely fine and that he did not need to worry about her. Her father expressed guilt, stating that she was the only family he had left, and he could not even take care of her properly. Dropping her forced demeanor, Asahina gently reiterated that she was truly fine, telling her father that she wished he would take better care of himself instead. Her father stared back at her in silence. Breaking the tension, her father let out a laugh and clarified that he meant she would not know what to do if he suddenly collapsed, which Asahina politely agreed with. Her father then shifted the topic, announcing that he was starting a new business in America and would be out of Japan for a while again, leaving Asahina staring at him in mild shock. Asahina's father urged her to take care of herself and promised to come back, admitting that he was unsure when he would be able to see her again. Asahina quietly accepted his words and told her father that she understood. Later at school, the door to the AV room slid open. Sue and Seiya entered the room to find Asahina already sitting at the desk, prompting Sue to comment on how early she was. Seiya noted that Asahina was always the first to arrive, and she explained that no one else was around when she got there, before asking if they had seen the exam results and where Yui was. Seiya worriedly wondered if Yui was running late because her exam scores were bad, silently telling himself to prepare just in case. Just then, Yui slid the door open with a bright smile and apologized for being late. Seiya pointed out that Yui looked tired and told her to sit down, causing a confused Asahina to ask what was going on with the three of them. Yui asked if they thought she was upset about bad test scores before proudly pulling out a plastic shopping bag and telling them to look at what she brought. Yui revealed a large stash of snacks and drinks, proudly explaining that she was only late because she had to sneak all of them into the room without getting caught. Yui happily explained that she bought the treats so they could celebrate working so hard, asking the boys to praise her for her efforts. Yui squealed that she wanted to do this for them every single day, though Seiya jokingly replied that every day would be a bit much as they began opening the drinks. With the snacks and drinks fully laid out on the table, they all prepared to dig in. Yui suddenly jumped up to announce a toast, prompting Seiya to ask a flustered Asahina to lead the cheer. Asahina nervously cleared her throat to say that today was a good day, but Sue quickly interrupted to point out that it was actually a bad day. Yui scolded them for being so loud during their celebration as they playfully bickered about their roles in the group. The four of them raised their cups together to commemorate how hard they had worked. They all smiled warmly and cheered happily as they clinked their cups in celebration. Yui proudly showed off some disposable chopsticks she had brought, earning a compliment from Sue, while Asahina looked on in confusion. Asahina hesitantly admitted that she had never eaten cheap packaged snacks before and did not know which one to start with, leaving the others completely stunned. Asahina mentioned that she usually ate cookies prepared by her personal chef and had never tried store-bought snacks, making Seiya internally marvel at her rich lifestyle. Yui suggested she try the potato chips first, while Seiya added that the consommé flavor was the best, prompting Asahina to hesitantly take her first bite. Asahina was delighted by the delicious salty flavor of the chip, while Yui remarked that salted ones were simple and tasty. Seiya mentioned seaweed flavor as another option, and Sue pointed out the chocolate-covered ones, which Asahina realized she might actually like. Seiya suddenly shifted the topic to ask Sue and Yui about their exam results, prompting Yui to remind him that their poor scores were the entire reason they were studying in the AV room in the first place. Seiya clarified that his score was far from average, leading Sue to assume it was actually below average, before turning to ask Seiya for his specific results. Seiya proudly revealed that he was only a single point away from failing every single subject, which Sue called amazing. Yui teased them for being seniors who liked to live on the edge, while Asahina let out a relieved sigh and expressed gladness that her tutoring had helped them avoid failing. Sue then asked Asahina how she had done on her own exams, and she softly replied that her results were above average. Seiya revealed that he saw she had placed second in her grade, expressing surprise that she achieved such high ranks every single time. Yui happily congratulated her and encouraged her to win first place next time, though Asahina quietly looked away. Sue asked Asahina if she spent a lot of time studying, and she explained that she made it a strict habit to review everything she learned as soon as she got home. Sue quietly acknowledged her dedication, pointing out that she was clearly doing her absolute best. Asahina blushed deeply and looked away in embarrassment at Sue's gentle words, while Yui watched her with a knowing smirk. With their study session finally wrapped up, someone suggested that it was time to clean up the messy desk. Sue and Seiya volunteered to handle the trash, but Yui insisted on doing it herself. Asahina also offered to pay for her of the snacks, but Yui quickly told her not to worry about it since she had bought them of her own free will. Sue reassured Asahina that she did not need to pay anything since they were the ones who had asked for her help in studying, offering her a sincere thank you instead. Sue then looked at Asahina and asked if she would be willing to help them study again in return. Sue directly asked her if that arrangement would be all right with her. Asahina looked back at them and smiled softly, clearly pleased by the request. Seiya, Sue, and Yui smiled back, warmly glad to see her happy. They cheerfully declared that the matter was officially settled. As they prepared to leave, Yui and Asahina waved goodbye to each other and exchanged warm thanks for the day. Seiya suggested that they should head home too, but Sue explained that he needed to make a quick stop first, and told Seiya to go on ahead. When Seiya asked where he was going, Sue quietly brushed it off and said it was fine. Seiya insisted that Sue not hide anything from him and demanded to know where he was going, prompting Sue to confess that he was heading to the hospital. Seiya demanded to know what Sue was up to this time, and Sue began to explain the events of their day. Sue admitted that having a party with his classmates had actually been fun, explaining that this was exactly why he wanted to it with his mother. Seiya decided that he would tag along with him, and Sue quietly accepted and thanked him. Arriving back at the hospital, Sue knocked on the door of the room labeled Maki Kotoko. The hospital room door slowly slid open, revealing Sue's mother lying in her bed. Sue and Seiya walked into the room together. Sue's mother remained turned away on her pillow, silently staring out the window. The two boys stood quietly by her bedside. Sue softly called out to his mother. Glaring at him from her bed, his mother coldly demanded to know why he was there. Sue explained that he and his classmates had held a small party today to celebrate passing their exams. Sue quietly added that he had genuinely enjoyed himself. Sue looked down and told his mother that was all he had wanted to say. His mother flatly ordered him to get out of her room immediately. Sue quietly accepted her harsh dismissal. Sue and Seiya turned around and began walking out of the room. The hospital room door slid completely shut behind them. Sue turned to Seiya and quietly called out his name. Sue stood in silence, looking down as he processed his mother's harsh words. Sue struggled to speak, tightly clenching his clothes in frustration. Sue gave a weak, self-deprecating smile and remarked that he seemed to talk a lot. Seiya stood by, watching Sue with a quiet and somber look. Seiya kept his mouth closed in silence, unable to find the right words to say. Sue stood outside the room door, telling Seiya that he didn't need to stay. Seiya told Sue to head home first, prompting Sue to ask if he was doing all right, to which Seiya plainly replied that he was doing fine like always. Seiya sat alone on a bench in a quiet park, leaning back to look up at the sky. Seiya raised his hand to his forehead, lost in his own thoughts. Seiya recalled a childhood memory of his mother gently embracing him while he was crying. Seiya remembered his mother touching his hair, thinking back to the time she had dyed it. Seiya quietly continued to reflect on those distant days. Seiya stared up at the cloudy sky, feeling as though everything was ultimately fine. The next day at school, Asahina brightly declared that she was finished and zipped up her school bag. Asahina took light, cheerful steps down the hallway. Asahina slid the door open and warmly welcomed Yui, addressing her as Sanami-san. Asahina asked if Seiya and Sue had not arrived yet, and Yui confirmed they had not, causing Asahina to silently wonder why they were not there since they had left the classroom before her. Asahina put her things down at the desk while Yui sat quietly reading her textbook. Asahina quietly stole a glance at Yui as she read. Asahina thought to herself that Yui was actually harder to read than Seiya, noting how she could say blunt things yet still sound caring and amiable, while appearing completely uninterested in other people. Asahina gasped in surprise when Yui suddenly called her name, snapping her out of her deep thoughts. Yui smiled warmly and asked Asahina what was the matter. Yui jokingly pointed out that Asahina had been staring at her this entire time, teasingly wondering if Asahina was falling in love with her, which made a flustered Asahina quickly deny it by stammering that it was nothing. Yui leaned closer and directly confessed that she liked Asahina, playfully asking if Asahina did not like her in return, which left Asahina completely stunned. Yui playfully touched Asahina's chin, telling her that she had been waiting to be alone with her for a long time, and asking if she hated her as a woman, which made Asahina frantically try to stop her. While Asahina flusteredly stuttered her name, Yui suddenly broke out into laughter and promised she would stop joking around, leaving Asahina in complete disbelief. Yui smirked and teasingly asked If she had left Asahina hanging, making Asahina internally fume in absolute embarrassment over her senior's relentless teasing. Yui giggled and called her a cute pushover for blushing so easily, mockingly asking if it was okay for them to continue where they had left off, while Asahina desperately argued that she did not even mean any of it. Yui playfully threw up a peace sign and added that she would only continue if Asahina paid her enough money, leaving Asahina staring back in complete silence. Yui then quickly composed herself and pointed out that Asahina had originally wanted to ask her something else. Yui directly asked Asahina if she was worried about her relationship with Seiya. Asahina quickly looked away and claimed that she was not really worried about it at all. Yui calmly observed her reaction, maintaining her quiet and knowing expression. Yui softly noted that Asahina really was a perfect person. Asahina asked if Yui thought she was stupid, but Yui warmly reassured her that she really meant what she said and confirmed that she did not hate Asahina after all. Yui went on to tell Asahina not to worry, clarifying that she and Seiya were not actually dating and that Asahina did not need to mind her. Yui mischievously told Asahina that she could flirt with Seiya as much as she wanted, causing Asahina to blush intensely and stammer in sheer embarrassment at the word. While Asahina loudly insisted that she would never do such a thing, she internally struggled to understand Yui, noting that her senior could be incredibly sincere one moment and utterly unpredictable the next. Yui excitedly pumped her fist and asked if she could at least take a photo when they did flirt, proudly declaring that she was already working on her own drama scenario at home. As the scene shifted to the outside of the school building, Asahina silently concluded to herself that all of these people were seriously bad news. Sue and Seiya slid the door open and entered the room, apologizing to the girls for taking so long. Yui asked what had happened, and Sue complained about the student advisor, explaining that he had been called in because the advisor had a problem with his appearance, while Seiya was left alone. Seiya apologized to them for the wait, and Asahina replied that they had been waiting for a while Yui smirked and nervously claimed that nothing at all had happened during their absence. Sue remarked that it was the first time Asahina and Yui had been left alone together, prompting him to ask what they talked about, which made Asahina panic while Yui smirked. Yui began to claim that she would tell them the truth about Asahina, and Seiya prompting a deeply flushed Asahina to scream at her to wait a moment and mistakenly calling Yui by a bizarre nickname. Asahina frantically grabbed Yui by the shoulders to stop her from talking, while Sue and Seiya watched them in total confusion. Sue and Seiya repeated the strange nickname Asahina had blurted out, asking what it was supposed to mean, while Asahina covered her mouth in sheer horror over her slip of the tongue. Yui giggled and asked Asahina what was wrong, while Seiya teasingly called Yui by the new nickname, prompting Yui to yell at him not to call her that, as Asahina desperately tried to plead with Yui to stop. Sue stepped forward, catching Asahina's attention. Sue firmly ordered both Seiya and Yui to stop pointing out that they were bothering Asahina. Asahina looked up at Sue with a soft, deeply relieved expression in her eyes. Sue's intervention worked as Seiya rubbed his neck and apologized, while Yui also cheerfully apologized. Asahina quietly thanked Sue for speaking up, and Sue told her not to worry about it, though she internally admitted that she still couldn't help but worry about the whole situation. Sue suddenly leaned in close to Asahina, turning serious as he asked her for a favor, which caught her off guard. Sue silently held her gaze with an intense, steady stare. Sue directly confessed that he wanted to eat her lunch, leaving Asahina looking back at him in complete shock. Sue asked her what she thought about his request, while Asahina could only stammer back in disbelief. The others immediately erupted in chaotic shouting, accusing Sue of making the request completely on purpose, while Sue frantically tried to defend himself. As a menacing aura flared up around a deeply blushing Asahina, Sue frantically urged the other two to leave for their part-time jobs, and the door slid shut behind Seiya and Yui as they bid them goodbye. The door slammed shut behind their friends, and a highly embarrassed Asahina muttered that they were definitely making fun of her. Sue teased her by pointing out that she actually had a great time, which made Asahina defensively yell that she did not care. Sue smiled warmly and said he preferred it when she was funny like this rather than pretending to be docile. Asahina quietly muttered that it was not as if she actually enjoyed pretending to be docile. Sue stared back at her in silent understanding. Sue quietly called out to her. Asahina admitted that she was fully aware of her own shortcomings, but explained that she at least wanted to play the role of a respectable person on the surface, wondering aloud if that was really a bad thing. Sue quietly listened as she spoke. Sue sighed and said he did not know, but added that if she had an ideal self she wanted to achieve, he would not stop her. Sue asked if pushing herself so hard to reach her goals would leave any part of her happy, suggesting that she change her goals slightly and find a way to be herself from the very beginning. Asahina tightly clenched her fist in frustration. Asahina admitted that she actually disliked the phrase about being herself, which made Sue quickly apologize for his bad advice, though Asahina quietly noted that he was only trying to console her. Sue apologized once more, but Asahina quickly assured him that it was completely fine. Sue sighed and jokingly cursed himself, laughing that he knew he wouldn't be as good as Seiya at consoling her, which made Asahina angrily ask why he was bringing Seiya up now. Sue explained that Seiya was usually insensitive and erratic, but noted that he sometimes said things so perfectly right on the money that it seemed like he could read minds. Asahina stared back in surprise as she slowly realized the truth behind his words. Sue kept his gaze steady and calm. Sue jokingly said that he would just leave her to Seiya since they were perfect for each other, which made a flustered Asahina loudly insist that it was not like that at all. Asahina quietly wondered to herself what Seiya would actually say if he were there, thinking about how amazing he was. Sue sighed softly and admitted that he could not even begin to copy Seiya. A woman held a lit cigarette while remembering a group of girls laughing and loudly telling someone to act more imposing. The woman took a drag from her cigarette as the laughter faded. The woman stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray, sitting in total silence at the table. Seiya and Yui walked into the room and announced their return, catching the woman's attention. Yui cheerfully remarked that her mother looked bored out of her mind today, causing her mother to let out a heavy, tired sigh. Seiya silently looked at Yui, reflecting on how she maintained her easygoing nature even in a pessimistic world like theirs. Seiya quietly admired Yui for being so flawless and easygoing while realizing his own innate diligence was the only way he could get things done. Seiya wondered to himself what would have happened if they had never come to this place. Yui's mother called out to Seiya, cutting off his silent thoughts about what their lives could have been. She directly asked Seiya if he ever regretted coming to this place. Seiya stared back as her heavy, tired eyes locked onto him. Seiya quietly replied that he did not know. Seiya smiled gently and added that he was ultimately glad he had met her, leaving the woman in stunned silence. The woman apologized for asking such a strange question and told him he could go, and Seiya politely took his leave as the door slid shut behind him. A battered-looking man stepped into the room, casually greeting the woman and asking how her business was doing. The man asked if Seiya was there today, and the woman quietly confirmed that he was. A sinister smirk formed across the man's bruised face. The man asked if he could make Seiya cry today, prompting the woman to sternly remind him of their rules, though the man casually dismissed her warning and promised not to break him. Seiya quietly greeted the man addressing him as Teichai-san and calmly confirmed that he had been doing well when Teichai asked how he was. Teichai patted Seiya on the shoulder and announced it was time for them to get going. Teichai smirked and told Seiya to head to the booked room after their session, playfully complaining that he did not like it when Seiya talked about other clients in front of him. Yui's mother quietly thought to herself about how endless malice lay at the very bottom of their world. She internally lamented that she was completely powerless to do anything about their grim reality. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the front of a quiet restaurant labeled with the number 10. A waiter politely guided Asahina into a lavish private dining room. Her father sat at the table, offering her a calm and polite smile. Asahina took her seat across from her father at the massive, elegantly set table. Asahina stared blankly ahead, completely lost in her thoughts, as she suddenly recalled her father's words. Asahina let out a quiet, confused gasp in her mind. Back in the present, Asahina silently stared out of the car window at the bright headlights of the busy evening traffic. She watched the crowds of pedestrians walking along the sidewalk. She remembered her father calling her Arisa and asking if she would mind a specific request. Her father had directly asked if she wanted to come with him to the United States. Asahina had repeated the word in complete shock. Her father had explained that he wouldn't be returning to Japan for a very long time, apologizing for the sudden news and suggesting that she go home to think it over before giving her answer. Asahina had dropped her cutlery with a loud clatter, causing her father to worriedly call out her name. She gasped as she snapped back to reality. The driver asked if something had happened, and Asahina quickly reassured him that she had only spaced out for a moment and that everything was fine. The driver apologized for the heavy traffic, explaining that the road was quite crowded, but Asahina quietly assured him that it was fine. Asahina panicked, internally wondering what she was supposed to do now that she was suddenly expected to move to the United States. She wondered who she could possibly talk to about her dilemma. She evaluated her friends, noting that, while Yui was not a bad person, Sue seemed like the type who carefully thought things through before turning her thoughts to Seiya. Asahina blushed deeply as she thought about Seiya. She wondered how Seiya would react to her leaving, questioning if he would actually miss her, or if he would simply nod and calmly accept it like he always did. Her train of thought about Seiya being sad was suddenly cut short as she looked out of the window. Asahina stared out of the window in absolute shock at what she saw. She saw Seiya smiling warmly as he leaned intimately close to the woman with glasses. Asahina could only let out a weak gasp as her eyes watered at the sight. Asahina watched in silence as the woman leaned her head on Seiya's shoulder while they walked away together. Tears welled up in Asahina's eyes as she looked away, feeling completely devastated. She silently questioned why she was feeling so deeply hurt by the sight. The scene shifted back to the AV room at school the following day. The four of them sat quietly in a row inside the classroom. While Asahina silently wrote in her notebook with a somber expression, Sue rested his chin on his hand and looked out the window. Seiya sweatily noted that something felt incredibly off about the atmosphere in the room. Breaking the heavy silence, Yui suddenly slammed the desk and enthusiastically called out to Asahina. Yui asked what Asahina was reading, and when Asahina named Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Yui teased her for being such a bookworm, prompting a hesitant glance from Yui as she tried to continue. Asahina smiled warmly and asked what was wrong, but Yui quickly panicked and insisted it was nothing. An awkward silence descended upon the room once again. Seiya quietly sighed as Yui watched him in silent panic. Asahina packed up her book and announced that she was heading home for her ballet lessons, thanking them for the day as Yui told her to do her best. Asahina bid them goodbye and walked out. After the door slammed shut, the remaining three sat in silent tension. Yui asked Sue if he saw what she meant, and Sue quietly agreed that he did. Sue asked Seiya if he had felt anything off, but Seiya cluelessly asked what he meant, prompting an irritated Sue to explain that he disliked it when Seiya was so dense. Sue noted that Asahina had seemed completely different from usual today, explaining that she had tried to talk to him, but it felt like there was a cold wall between them. Sue pointed out that Asahina had been staring directly at Seiya several times during class, asking if Seiya had any idea why she did that. Seiya admitted that he had no idea, which Sue noted was exactly what he figured he would say. Sue d his hunch that Seiya had something to do with her strange behavior, suggesting that Seiya directly ask Asahina about it tomorrow. Sue reasoned to himself that even if Seiya was completely innocent, he would still be the best person to listen to whatever was bothering Asahina. While Seiya reluctantly agreed to ask her, Sue internally resolved that as a friend, he wanted to help Seiya through whatever this was. Sue stood up and announced that it was time for them to head home as well. Yui asked Seiya if something was wrong, and Seiya quickly assured her that he was fine. Seiya silently worried about what could be happening. As the scene shifted to the school exterior under the cloudy evening sky, a warning message noted that the road ahead was becoming muddy. Asahina stepped out of the car as her driver wished her a good day, thanking him in return. Asahina worriedly wondered to herself if her behavior the previous day had been truly terrible, reflecting on how she had messed up during her ballet lessons too, and doubting her ability to keep up appearances. She stood in silence, feeling deeply troubled. She silently hoped that her friends did not hate her, worrying that she had intruded on their group, and assuming that their dynamic would simply revert to how it was before. She reminded herself that Seiya had only asked her for help with studying, and nothing more, yet she could not stop wondering about his relationship with the mature-looking woman she had seen him with. She tightly clenched her fist, reminding herself that she had turned down Seiya's confession in the first place. Telling herself that she had no right to care about his personal life, she opened her locker only to spot a torn slip of paper lying on top of her bag. She stared in complete surprise at the unexpected note. With a soft rustle, she picked up the note to read it. The handwritten note instructed her to meet at the rooftop after school. Asahina stood completely frozen in front of her locker, processing the message. She stared down at the note, silently questioning what she was even hoping for. A sudden voice from behind made Asahina jump in shock as she spun around to find Seiya standing there. Seiya calmly greeted her, and a flustered Asahina quickly hid the note behind her back with a rustle while stammering her morning greeting in return. Seiya asked if someone had requested to meet with her again, and when she nervously confirmed it, Seiya simply told her to do her best. Seiya then suddenly brought up the events of the previous day, catching her completely off guard. Seiya directly asked if he had done something wrong, leaving Asahina momentarily stunned. Seiya explained that Sue had told him He must have done something wrong to upset her, asking her if that was really the case. Asahina frantically denied it, making up an excuse that she simply had not been feeling well yesterday, though she quickly reassured him that she felt perfectly fine now when he asked. Seiya turned to lead the way to their classroom, and Asahina quietly agreed as she stepped forward to follow him. Seiya and Asahina walked into the classroom together, catching the attention of their classmates as the door slid shut. Quiet murmurs and whispers immediately broke out among the students in the room. Asahina kept her head low in distress, while Seiya calmly glanced over at her. Asahina internally sighed over how her classmates were always spreading rumors about her, wondering what they would make up today, just as someone called out her name. Asahina greeted Sue, who admitted Seiya had told him she wasn't feeling well yesterday, and apologized for not realizing sooner, though she quickly reassured him that she was fine now. Sue kindly offered that she could hang out with them again whenever she wanted, prompting Asahina to smile and quietly thank him, though she internally remained deeply conflicted. Asahina wondered how both Seiya and Sue could remain so completely calm despite the growing number of rumors circulating since she had started hanging out with them. She silently admitted to herself that she was not as strong or unflappable as they were. She reflected on how they possessed the strength to accept criticism, the toughness to avoid being hurt, and the ability to ignore negativity, realizing that she lacked all of those traits. Asahina's thoughts were suddenly overwhelmed by the memory of Seiya leaning intimately close to the other woman. Telling herself to get a grip, Asahina suddenly slapped both sides of her face, startling Sue, who immediately asked if something was wrong. An embarrassed Asahina quickly insisted it was nothing, frantically making up an excuse that she was just getting a little sleepy, when Sue pointed out that she had just slapped her own face. Their conversation was cut short as a loud voice announced that class was about to start and ordered everyone to sit down. Asahina sat down, trying to focus her mind. Seiya quietly sat down, maintaining his usual blank expression. Asahina silently wondered if Seiya was expecting something from her as she sat at her desk. As she wrote, she kept thinking back to the note instructing her to go to the rooftop after school. After school, a voice called out to Asahina as she prepared to leave. Sue asked her if she was planning to go to the AV room today, and Asahina politely replied that she could go another time, which Sue warmly accepted. As Seiya and Sue turned to walk away, Seiya quietly looked back at her and told her to do her best at her ballet lessons. Asahina stared back in surprise at Seiya's encouraging parting words. She quietly murmured her agreement to herself. The scene shifted to the school rooftop under a cloudy sky after school. Asahina waited on the rooftop, internally noting that her meeting partner was already half an hour late, when a voice suddenly called out to her. The boy warmly apologized for keeping her waiting, complaining about how incredibly hot the weather was, while Asahina offered him a polite, formal greeting. The boy casually laughed about how physical education class was such a hassle, proudly admitting that he had bailed halfway through, which made Asahina silently classify him as a typical slacker. The boy continued to ramble about not wanting to get sweaty in the heat, prompting a straightforward Asahina to directly ask why he had called her up to the roof. The boy confidently asked if she wanted to go out with him. Asahina immediately apologized and rejected him, but the boy pushed back, playfully promising that he would make sure she had plenty of fun if she gave him a chance. The boy boastfully asked if she wanted to know what other girls said about him, but Asahina firmly repeated her apology. Asahina plainly clarified that she could not even begin to think about dating anyone right now. The boy casually shrugged it off, telling her that he would not force her to date him until she was ready, but suggested they still hang out sometime at some hidden adult spots and bars he knew of, asking if she was interested. Asahina immediately declined his offer to hang out. She let out a confused gasp as the boy suddenly shifted his tone. The boy's friendly demeanor completely vanished as he aggressively demanded to know what she was talking about, pointing out that she hung out with Sue and Seiya after school anyway. Asahina's heart thumped in anger and shock at his sudden aggression. Asahina firmly corrected him, explaining that they were only studying together and it was not what he thought, but the boy mockingly laughed and claimed there was no way those punks were actually studying. Asahina defended her friends by stating that Sue was a good student and Seiya was working hard too, but the boy smugly asked what that had to do with her. The boy angrily ordered her to shut up and mind her own business, prompting a sharp click of his tongue, as Asahina coldly countered that her friends and whereabouts were none of his business either. The boy spat back bitterly, warning her not to get on a high horse just because she had a pretty face. The boy sneered that she was only stuck up because she was rich, accusing her of looking down on everyone, while a shaken Asahina stammered in protest that she was not looking down on anyone. He furiously yelled that she was all looks on the outside, but an ugly person on the inside, leaving her completely speechless. He brought up the school rumors, aggressively accusing her of sleeping with Sue and Seiya, which left her utterly devastated. He leaned in close to her face, warning her not to get ahead of herself just because he had been nice to her for a moment, and directly called her a slut. As Asahina quietly trembled and wept, he demanded that she say something, aggressively calling her a bitch. Overwhelmed by fear, Asahina's feet turned as she prepared to flee. Ignoring his angry shouts to stop, Asahina sprinted away down the stairs as fast as she could. She panted heavily as tears streamed down her face, just as a sudden downpour of rain began to fall. She continued to sprint, while gasping for breath, the boy's cruel words about the rumors echoing painfully in her mind. She suddenly tripped and fell hard onto the school floor with a painful groan. Asahina lay on the floor weeping bitterly in absolute despair. She slowly staggered up and made her way down the stairs, quietly acknowledging to herself that she already knew people gossiped about her behind her back. She recalled how everyone always put on fake smiles and showered her with superficial compliments every day. Her crying was suddenly interrupted when someone called out her name. She looked up to find Seiya standing in the hallway, and when she tearfully muttered his name, Seiya calmly asked her if her meeting was over. Seiya asked her what was wrong, but Asahina quickly looked down and told him it was nothing and not to worry, which Seiya quietly accepted. Without another word, Asahina turned and walked away down the corridor, leaving a silent Seiya watching her go. As she walked, her mind flashed back to the painful memory of Seiya walking intimately with the other woman, bringing fresh tears to her eyes. Walking alone down the empty hallway, Asahina silently resolved to go straight home, feeling that she did not want to see anyone else for the rest of the day. Asahina suddenly stopped her steps in the hallway. She looked back toward the stairs in confusion, realizing Seiya was walking in the opposite direction from the AV room. Turning her feet back around, Asahina wondered where Seiya was going. Staggering slightly, she slowly made her way up the stairs to follow him. Outside the room, she heard a voice mention that she had been crying. She froze in shock as she heard her classmate's voice mockingly refer to her. Looking through the crack of the door, she saw Seiya standing inside while the boy bragged about having told Asahina off earlier, claiming she was full of herself just because she was wealthy and attractive. Seiya calmly defended Asahina, stating that she was not full of herself at all. The boy angrily argued that her life was incredibly easy, since she could just inherit her family's company and follow the path her parents had laid out for her without a single worry. Tears welled in Asahina's eyes as she silently admitted to herself that it was indeed true. She had grown up in a far more privileged environment than most people. She reflected on how she had started to feel guilty about her privilege, believing that her guilt proved she secretly looked down on others, and telling herself that she had no right to complain since working hard was simply the norm. Inside the room, Seiya directly questioned the boy, asking if Asahina was truly in the wrong for taking the path before her. Seiya pointed out that she was constantly learning and trying her absolute best to achieve good grades and study after school, but the boy casually dismissed his points. The boy sneered that someone like Asahina, who had never even eaten potato chips, would never accept food from ordinary people like them, making Asahina wonder what Seiya was going to say in response. Seiya firmly declared that Asahina was struggling and doing her absolute best just to stay on her own path without any time to look away or take shortcuts. Asahina stared blankly, deeply moved and overwhelmed by Seiya's words. Overcome with emotion, Asahina slumped down to the floor, her tears falling freely in the quiet corridor. Inside the room, Seiya quietly muttered that he was probably only a bother to her, worrying that hanging out with a problem child like him would only force her to look away from her path. Asahina gasped as she heard Seiya softly add that she always looked happy and thanked him. Seiya continued to reflect out loud, wondering why Asahina acted the way she did. The boy slammed the door and left with an irritated click of his tongue, causing a startled Asahina to gasp. Asahina stood quietly against the wall, listening as Seiya slowly creaked the door open. Asahina stepped out onto the rooftop where Seiya was already waiting for her. Seiya quietly stared back at her. Seiya directly asked her if she had been listening to their conversation. She silently realized that her father had never truly understood her. Overwhelmed by emotion, Asahina suddenly threw herself forward and hugged Seiya tightly, catching him completely off guard. She wept bitterly, burying her face into his uniform. Seiya's surprised expression quickly softened into a gentle look. Seiya warmly wrapped his arms around her to hug her back. Asahina softly asked what he wanted from her. Clenching his uniform tightly, she admitted that he always managed to make her happy. Asahina explained that ever since she had started hiding behind layers of denial, She had desperately wanted to stop, but never realized how to do so until he noticed her struggle. She told him that, when she was struggling with how to be kind, he had spoken the exact words she had been longing to hear. Sayer recalled his own advice about how she did not need to actually become kind, but only needed to use her imagination, positively realizing that those words ultimately applied to his own state of mind as well. Sayer thought to himself that he had always just given people the exact answers they wanted, like solving an equation, admitting that doing so had never actually made him happy, and that he had been lying this entire time. She tearfully confessed the truth that she felt as though no one would ever be happy with her. She admitted that she usually disliked people who only paid lip service, but explained that she had felt truly understood for the first time ever with him. Asahina quietly revealed that it was the first time in her entire life she had ever actually liked someone else. Asahina admitted she had also noticed he was following her because he wanted something from her, though she initially couldn't figure out what it was. Seiya quietly waited for her to explain what exactly she meant. Seiya hesitated, struggling to put his feelings into words. He plainly reiterated his desire to eat her lunch. Asahina asked him why he was so incredibly obsessed with her lunch. Seiya admitted that he did not actually know the reason why himself. She quietly realized that she did understand that much. She admitted that wanting to eat her lunch was the only thing she truly knew about him, yet she felt inexplicably drawn to Seiya and knew she could never go back to the way she was before. Staring back at him, she firmly resolved that she had to bring an end to this dynamic. She sadly revealed that she would be moving to America. She directly repeated that she was going to move to America. She explained that her father had asked her to come live with him overseas. Seiya quietly acknowledged the news, looking visibly stunned. She confirmed the news, explaining that she would be leaving Japan very soon. Seiya quietly murmured that her departure was a shame. She looked at him and asked if that was really what he thought, questioning if his words actually matched how he felt inside. She closed her eyes, telling herself that there was absolutely no point in overthinking his feelings now. She offered him her sincere thanks for standing up for her earlier against their classmate. Smiling through her tears, she gently admitted that his support had made her truly happy. Seiya quietly stared back at her in silence. Later at school, Asahina stood in the hallway with her father while Seiya and Sue quietly watched them through the classroom window. The scene shifted to the classroom door of the AV room. Sue, Seiya, and Yui sat in a quiet row inside the classroom. Sue asked Seiya if he knew what had happened to Asahina, noting that she had not visited the AV room at all since she announced she was going to change schools. Yui joined the conversation, worriedly asking Seiya what had actually happened between the two of them. Seiya calmly replied that he did not know. When Sue questioned his response in disbelief, Seiya clarified that he genuinely did not know, or at least that was simply what Asahina had told him. Seiya recalled that, when he told Asahina he wanted to eat her lunch, she had replied that she did not understand what he meant. Seiya silently realized that Asahina had been deeply hurt, and that he was ultimately the one who had hurt her. As Yui and Sue stared at him in tense silence, Seiya quietly confessed that he still did not understand what was wrong with what he had said. The three of them sat in an awkward, heavy silence once again. Seiya quietly maintained that he only asked to eat her lunch because he genuinely wanted to eat it, explaining that he still did not see what was wrong with making that request. Just as their classroom phone suddenly began to ring, a deeply exhausted Sue quietly muttered Seiya's name. Seiya pulled out his phone and quietly apologized, explaining that it was his phone ringing. Sue quietly cursed under his breath and urged Yui to say something as well, pointing out that her beloved senior was in serious trouble, but Yui folded her arms and flatly refused. Yui reasoned that there was absolutely no advantage in getting involved, noting that it wasn't as if Seiya would suddenly like her anyway, even if she helped him this time. While a confused Sue tried to protest her words, Yui firmly maintained that it made the most sense for Seiya to figure this situation out on his own. Yui explained that while she didn't mind if Sue decided to help Seiya, she personally was not going to tell him anything at all. Yui directly told Sue that she was being completely serious, staring back with a sharp glare, as she explained that keeping silent was both for her own sake and for Seiya's. Yui finally agreed and complained that the other girl was stubborn, while Sue let out a heavy sigh. As Seiya walked into the room, someone called out his name in surprise. Yui asked Seiya what had happened. Seiya stood frozen with a deeply shocked expression on his face. Seiya quietly muttered his mother's name, leaving Sue and Yui staring back at him in concern. The steady beeping of a heart monitor echoed in a hospital room. The woman lay in the hospital bed, breathing heavily through an oxygen mask as the machine continued to beep. The doctor stood nearby while Seiya and Sue watched her condition in tense silence. The Roman 4 dripped steadily into her arm as she lay unconscious to the sound of the monitor. The doctor instructed Seiya to hold his mother's hand. Seiya quietly replied that his mother had previously told him not to touch her. The doctor announced that he would wait outside and leave them alone, instructing Seiya to call him if anything happened, which Seiya acknowledged. Sue watched Seiya in heavy silence as the machine continued to beep. As Seiya looked down, his mother weakly opened her eyes and addressed the two of them. Seiya stammered his mother's name in surprise as she looked back at him. Her hand trembled weakly on the sheets as she struggled to tell them to be happy there. Seiya quickly reached out and grasped her hand, asking what she was trying to say as she weakly mumbled that someone had to suffer. She pulled Seiya close by his head and coldly declared that he should be the one to suffer. Seiya stared back in absolute shock as the heart monitor began to emit a continuous, unbroken tone. The long, flatline tone rang out loudly through the room. Seiya remained frozen, holding his mother's lifeless hand, while Sue stood behind him in the quiet hospital room, the monitor displaying a flat line. As Seiya stood frozen with tears welling in his eyes, internally noting that she was cursing him even in the bitter end, Sue yelled out as the doctor and nurses frantically rushed into the room behind them. Sometime later, Yui, Seiya, and Sue stood together in formal mourning attire. Seiya quietly held the ornate white wrapped urn containing his mother's ashes. Sue watched Seiya from behind, silently noting that Seiya had not cried at all during the funeral or the cremation. Sue looked up at the cloudy sky, wondering to himself if either of them had ever shed a single tear throughout the ordeal. The scene shifted to Seiya sitting alone on a quiet park bench. Sue silently stared at Seiya's back, lost in his memories. Sue remembered seeing Seiya's mother lying peacefully in her casket, completely surrounded by white flowers. He recalled the blank, empty expression in Seiya's eyes as he looked down at her. Back in the present, Sue casually touched his hair and wondered out loud what he should do with his hair color now. Sue recalled their past, explaining that after Seiya's mother discovered her husband was having an affair, and the family collapsed, all that remained in their trash-filled apartment was a lonely wife. Sue noted that she had turned to alcohol and men, while abusing Seiya, remembering how she would aggressively grab Seiya by the hair and angrily scream at him to stop being so gloomy, while Seiya cried out in pain. Sue reflected that, while it was likely an all too well-known story, it was all that mattered to Seiya, as the young boy wept and cowered on the floor. As the mother violently screamed, Sue explained that he had originally dyed his hair because he wanted to tell Seiya's mother, who had changed so drastically, that she was not alone. Young Sue sat outside their apartment door, internally admitting that his dyed hair was just a desperate attempt to lighten her mood when the door suddenly unlatched. Young Sue looked up in surprise as Seiya's mother stepped out of the apartment. The mother stopped and stared down at young Sue with wide, completely shocked eyes. Young Sue watched from the doorway as Seiya's mother dropped to her knees and tearfully hugged young Seiya. Sue noted that despite the constant violence and mistreatment young Seiya received, he lived on and made efforts in his own clumsy way entirely for his mother's sake. Sue reflected that Seiya's mother was ultimately all the bruised and battered young boy had left. Sue silently concluded that despite her warped mind, Seiya's mother remained the absolute pillar of his life. Sue remained completely silent as he thought about Seiya's tragic past. Staring up at the cloudy sky, Sue silently wondered if people who lost their pillars like that could even keep on living, quietly calling out Seiya's name in his thoughts. Several weeks later, someone held up their smartphone. Sue called out to Seiya, who quietly looked down at his phone. Seiya let out a small noise of surprise as Sue suddenly yelled his name. Sue stared at him in tense silence until Seiya calmly asked him what was wrong. Sue asked Seiya if renouncing his inheritance would mean he wouldn't have to worry about the debt, prompting him to ask about Seiya's house as Yui watched. Seiya explained that a while back his mother had told him he had better pay the debt back, leaving Sue completely stunned. An enraged Sue screamed at Seiya, asking why he wouldn't understand and calling him stupid, since his mother was gone now, angrily reminding him that she got the debt herself to play around. Sue furiously demanded to know why Seiya had to be the one to pay back the debt in the first place, startling Yui. Seiya silently stared back with a completely blank expression. Sue suddenly stopped his angry shouting and stuttered, his expression shifting to one of regret. Seiya calmly explained that even so, he simply did not want to give up the house where his mother had lived. Sue tightly clenched his trembling jaw in silence. Sue bitterly told Seiya to do whatever he wanted before abruptly turning his back on him and walking away. As he walked away, Sue quietly muttered an apology. Yui stood in absolute silence, watching Sue with a worried expression. Yui hesitantly called out to Seiya, asking him if there was anything he actually wanted to do for himself. Seiya plainly admitted he didn't know, prompting a flustered Yui to laugh and wave her hands, telling him he didn't have to answer right away, and suggesting he take his time to find something eventually. Su internally cursed himself for not knowing what else to say, but aloud he agreed with Yui, assuring Seiya that they would do whatever they could to help him. Su firmly instructed Seiya to find something he truly wanted to do, whatever it might be. Seiya stared back at Su in complete silence. Seiya quietly stated that he understood, as he turned and slid the door shut behind him. Su deeply regretted his actions, admitting he was awful at this, and had taken his anger out on the person having the hardest time, while Yui agreed he went too far and urged him to do everything he could to help Seiya now. Su looked up in quiet resignation. Yui softly admitted she didn't know what to do, and Su quietly agreed with her before thoughtfully trailing off. Yui thoughtfully put a hand to her chin and suggested that the situation with Asahina could be the key to helping them, leaving Su confused. Su internally acknowledged that Seiya had indeed been weirdly obsessed with Asahina's lunch, but pointed out aloud that she would be moving overseas very soon. Yui teased Su about suddenly meddling in other people's business, while Su earnestly argued that since Seiya and Asahina made it work, it would be meaningless if they were separated, especially since visiting overseas wouldn't be easy. Yui noted that since nothing else would change, Seiya's mind focusing on Asahina was all they could do, which Su reluctantly agreed with, before she muttered about planning for the worst-case scenario and prompted Su to ask what she meant. Yui confidently explained that if they could figure out the real reason why Seiya was so obsessed with Asahina's lunch, they could use that as a starting point to find something else for him. Su hesitantly asked if she actually knew the reason, but Yui sharply glared at him and fiercely repeated that she refused to say anything. As Yui nervously swallowed, Su calmly pointed out that despite all her complaints, she couldn't bring herself to leave Seiya alone now either. Su eagerly cheered as Yui finally yielded and agreed to tell him what she really thought. Yui stated there was a condition before she would speak, and Su immediately agreed, asking what it was. Looking directly at him with a deep blush, Yui softly asked Su to kiss her. Su stared at her in utter disbelief and muttered a confused sound. As Yui grabbed him by the collar, a deeply flustered Su frantically yelled out, asking her what she could possibly want a kiss for. Yui leaned in close to his face and softly called his name, leaving Su completely panicked. Yui slowly closed her eyes as she leaned in even closer. With their faces inches apart, Su desperately yelled her name and told her to wait. Su forcefully shoved her away by the shoulders, angrily yelling at her to stop it already. While Yui calmly stared back, heavily blushing and panting, Su demanded to know what she was trying to do. Yui smiled brightly and cheerfully declared that it was exactly what she had expected from him, adding that Asahina had a very strong will. Su confusedly asked what she meant, prompting Yui to suddenly ask if he liked her, which caught him completely off guard once again. Su angrily asked what was wrong with her today, but Yui firmly repeated her question, insisting that he answer whether he liked her or not. Su nervously asked why she was bringing this up, all of a sudden awkwardly admitting that he had never seen her in that way before. Yui snapped her fingers and clarified that he didn't like her romantically, to which Su hesitantly agreed. Yui pointed at him and explained that even though he didn't have feelings for her, he still reacted when she got close to him. Su stammered as Yui pointed out that he had still blushed. Su defensively tried to deny it, but Yui cheerfully told him that he didn't need to feel shy about it. An embarrassed Su listened as Yui explained that physical acts like holding hands, hugging, and skin-to-skin contact were very meaningful. Yui maintained a calm demeanor as she continued. Yui clarified that those physical actions were typically meaningful for everyone else. Su stared back in realization as Yui began to outline the rest of her theory with a serious expression. Yui theorized that if physical acts of affection or even more extreme things were done to Seiya, he would have no reaction. She stated that he wouldn't even flinch, asking Su why he thought Seiya was like that, which left Su staring back in shock. Su quietly answered that it was because of his job, and Yui confirmed he was exactly right. Tears welled up in Yui's eyes as she described the harsh reality of his job, explaining that it meant hugging people he disliked and whispering declarations of love to people he didn't even care for. She added that after repeating those hollow actions for so long, she believed Seiya had completely forgotten what any of it actually meant. Looking away, sadly, Yui concluded that this emotional detachment must be the real reason why Seiya was so deeply obsessed with Asahina's lunch. Su stared at her in stunned silence as the weight of her words fully registered. Yui, suddenly broke the tension by cheerfully clapping her hands and laughing that she really didn't understand it, after all playfully reminding Sue that she wouldn't say anything more since she had only promised him that much. Sue asked her why if she knew Seiya so well she didn't just compete with Asahina for him. Yui seriously asked Sue if he knew what the word infatuated meant, to which a bewildered Sue muttered that he thought he had heard of it. Yui explained that there were people who made fun of those who were infatuated, asking Sue if he thought discriminating like that was horrible. She argued that society stupidly assumed a one-sided love was merely infatuation, while simultaneously assuming being married automatically made someone a respectable person who cared about their relatives, despite everyone having different priorities. Yui tightly clenched her skirt in frustration. Sue admitted he didn't fully understand, but guessed she meant that it was fine as long as no one else was bothered, which Yui confirmed was exactly what she thought. Looking down, Yui softly added that despite that some people just couldn't be happy without upsetting a few others. The two of them stood side by side in heavy silence in the classroom. Yui quietly confessed that she wished she could have been the one there for Seiya. Sue calmly spoke up to his thoughts. He gently reassured her that she was already doing plenty for him. Yui turned back to him with a gentle smile, quietly pointing out that Sue was doing plenty for him as well. Sue stood in heavy silence, completely lost in his thoughts. The scene shifted to the tiled roof of Sue's house later that night. An exhausted Sue collapsed onto his bed with a heavy groan. His mind flashed back to Yui's gentle, smiling face from earlier that day. Staring blankly up at the ceiling, Sue cursed Yui under his breath, internally noting that she had made that same expression again. He closed his eyes and reflected on how he had always considered Seiya to be his best friend. The memory of Yui explaining how Seiya had forgotten the meaning behind his own actions echoed painfully in his head. Sue lay quietly in the dark as the realization sank in. He bitterly admitted to himself that he actually knew absolutely nothing about his friends. Frustrated by his own ignorance and helplessness, Sue violently sat up and grabbed his hair, cursing loudly. Acknowledging that he was the one who had actively avoided stepping in, Sue firmly resolved not to let things continue like this and reached for his smartphone. He remembered Yui reassuring him that he had also done plenty for Seiya. Sue dialed Seiya's number, and when a confused Seiya answered the call, Sue casually greeted him and asked if he was home. When Seiya confirmed he was, Sue quickly threw on his jacket and announced that he was coming over. Sue stepped out of his house and into the heavy pouring rain. Walking purposefully through the rain-soaked streets, Sue internally urged Seiya to wait for him. Sue continued his trek through the storm with his umbrella, his mind fully focused on reaching his friend. Sue's footsteps finally stopped in front of a stone wall bearing the nameplate for the Maki residence. Sue stood silently in the downpour, staring ahead at Seiya's house. Sue pressed the intercom button, the doorbell ringing out through the quiet house. Getting no response, Sue knocked loudly on the door and called out to Seiya, asking if he was inside. Sue stood in front of the door waiting in tense silence. Announcing that he was coming in, Sue grabbed the handle and slowly creaked the door open. He stepped inside, quietly staring down the dark hallway that was cluttered with tied-up garbage bags. Sue flipped on the light switch and slipped off his wet shoes, stepping up into the house. Walking into the living room, Sue found Seiya sitting calmly on the floor, surrounded by more trash bags, reading a book in the dark. Sue called out his name, prompting Seiya to look up and casually mention that he had not noticed Sue was there. Sue sat down beside him, grumbling that Seiya should have answered the door and at least turned on the lights, to which Seiya softly apologized. Sue noticed the book was a photo album, and Seiya confirmed that he had found it while sorting through some things. Sue asked if he could take a look as well, and Seiya calmly agreed. The album was filled with photos of young Seiya and his mother happily smiling together at various events like school plays and amusement parks, completely surrounded by friends. Staring at a picture of them beaming brightly, Sue remarked that they used to be so happy together. Sue smiled warmly at the photos while Seiya stared at the pages with a blank expression. Sue quietly noted to himself that Seiya's mother had not always worn such a miserable, warped look on her face. He reflected on how Seiya and his mother used to smile all the time and were always surrounded by people who cared for them. Sue silently concluded that all of their happiness lasted right up until Seiya's father had an affair. Turning his gaze toward his friend, Sue quietly called out Seiya's name. Sue directly asked Seiya if he resented his parents. Seiya simply stared back at him in absolute silence. Seiya quietly confessed to Sue that at first he did not even understand what had happened. He explained that his mother had tried to hide the divorce from him, and he had felt deeply saddened to learn he could no longer be with his father. He recalled that his father was rarely home due to his job, but during their brief visits, His father was always very kind and took him to many different places. Seiya continued his story explaining that after the divorce, his mother completely broke down and spent all her days crying, even hitting him on the monthly visits with his father, because she accused him of preferring his father over her. Right after hitting him, she would immediately pull him into a tight embrace, sobbing and repeatedly apologizing to Seiya. Then, Seiya decided to stop seeing his father entirely, hoping it would prevent his mother from feeling sad. Eventually, unfamiliar men began coming to his house daily, and Seiya would diligently clean up the rooms afterward so his mother wouldn't hate him. Debt collectors soon began coming to their house as his mother stopped working, spending her money on hosts and letting her debts pile up. Seiya had to deal with the debt collectors alone while his mother hid at another man's house, refusing to reveal her location, because he was terrified of what they might do to her. One day, a debt collector threatened him that he would have to sell his body if he couldn't pay back the money, and Seiya was taken to his current job without fully understanding what was happening. Seiya recalled that his very first customer at the establishment was an elderly lady over 60 years old. When he finally returned home, his mother was there waiting and simply told him to try his best. Despite the circumstances, Seiya admitted that finally receiving some recognition from his mother had actually made him happy. Seiya quietly looked away as the painful memories washed over him. Seiya confessed that deep down he always knew he was simply being used by his mother. But because she was so deeply hurt, he could not bring himself to give up on her, constantly holding on to the hope that she might one day return to her old self. Clenching his fist tightly, Seiya admitted he had spent his life trying to convince himself that it was entirely his fault his mother was angry with him. Seiya looked at Sue and quietly stated that he did not resent either of his parents. He explained that he truly did not want to harbor any resentment toward them. Sue quietly called out Seiya's name, looking at his friend, who still cherished the memory of the happy mother he once had. Sue reflected on human emotions, noting that people laugh when they are happy and cry when they are sad, and he believed that even Seiya must have those same natural feelings inside. Sue reached out and placed a firm hand on Seiya's shoulder to get his attention. Addressing Seiya directly, Sue admitted that he thought he might have actually just been jealous of him. When a confused Seiya questioned his words, Sue explained that Seiya kept trying for his mother no matter what she did to him, whereas Sue felt he could never bring himself to do something like that. Sue pointed out that if he were in Seiya's shoes, he would have made excuses for himself sooner or later, adding that even though they were not actually related, he still felt compelled to say his piece. Sue explained that Seiya must have grown tired of his mother, even though he desperately did not want to admit it, meaning the more he hated her the more he loathed himself, before apologizing for failing to look out for him while he suffered. Sue looked directly at Seiya and declared that Seiya was actually just the same as everyone else. Seiya looked visibly shaken by his words, raising a trembling hand to his face as he struggled to find his voice. Seiya's eyes widened in intense shock as tears began to well up inside them. Sue calmly admitted that he honestly knew absolutely nothing about family dynamics, so he was simply choosing to speak his own mind. Sue suddenly stepped forward and grabbed Seiya tightly by his collar. Looking his friend dead in the eyes, Sue firmly called out Seiya's name. Sue directly told him that it was perfectly fine for him to resent his parents. Sue reasoned that if someone had to unconditionally accept absolutely everything their family did to them, then they were no longer a family member, but rather a god. Seiya stood frozen in complete stunned silence as he listened to Sue's words. Sue continued explaining that when someone does something hurtful, it is only natural to hate them even while still remembering the good times and wishing to be close to them again. Sue quietly concluded that this was simply what he believed to be the truth. Seiya's mouth trembled weakly as he tried to speak, completely overwhelmed by his emotions. Seiya hesitantly asked if he was truly allowed to resent his parents, and Sue immediately reassured him that he was without a single doubt. The two of them stared at each other in heavy emotional silence as the weight of the realization settled between them. Seiya quietly digested Sue's words and murmured that he understood. The wall clock ticked steadily in the heavy silence of the room. Seiya softly called out to Sue, prompting his friend to ask what was on his mind. Seiya recalled the warmth of his childhood and the genuine smiles he used to with his mother. With tears streaming down his face, Seiya quietly confessed that he simply wanted to feel loved once again. Sue looked back at him, warmly reassuring him that his feelings were completely valid, even if nobody else actively expressed their love for him. Seiya quietly repeated his deep desire to be cared for once more. With tears in his eyes, he finished his confession, expressing his simple wish to feel loved again. Sue gently patted Seiya on the shoulder and suggested that they should start looking for a brand new goal in life together. Seiya listened quietly, his tears finally beginning to subside. Seiya softly agreed to his friend's suggestion as the night sky quieted outside. Seiya called out Sue's name as he prepared to leave, rustling a bag and telling him that he could take the photo albums home with him if he wanted. Seiya explained that Sue was featured in many of those childhood photos as well, suggesting they would serve as a good memory for him. Sue quietly stared down at the bag, feeling a sense of nostalgia. Later at home, Sue sat on his bed and flipped through the album, his eyes widening in surprise at what he found inside. The pages showed memories of them as children fighting over snacks, with a playful caption urging them to get along next to a photo of them happily wearing matching aprons. Smiling warmly at the pictures, Sue quietly reflected on how small they used to be, admitting to himself that he had completely forgotten what they even looked like back then. The final page featured a quiet photo of the two of them sleeping soundly side by side under a blanket as children. Sue read the handwriting in the album, noting that they were such good friends they were almost like real brothers. Looking closely at the pages, Sue felt an overwhelming wave of regret wash over him. The caption on the photo, written by Seiya's mother, described Seiya and Sue as such close friends that they were almost like real brothers. Staring at the text, Sue began to choke back tears as the realization of Seiya's mother's past warmth sank in. He tried to suppress his sobs, but a tear silently escaped and ran down his cheek in the quiet room. Overcome with grief, Sue collapsed forward on his knees and wept bitterly over the open photo album. He clenched his bedsheets tightly in sheer frustration and sorrow. Sue bitterly questioned why he could not keep trusting Seiya's mother, realizing he had been blinded by petty jealousy, while Seiya had stubbornly kept believing in her. He reflected that if he had chosen to stay and trust her, perhaps the family's story would not have ended in such a painful tragedy. Sue let out a muffled groan, burying his face deeper into his bedding as his tears continued to fall in the dark. He vividly remembered Seiya's mother warmly telling him as a child that he always took great care of Seiya and was just like an older brother to him. She had smiled, gently pleading with him to always continue taking good care of her son. Sue stared down at the childhood photo of them sleeping side by side with the handwritten caption describing them as real brothers. The scene shifted to the school building, standing under a bright, clear morning sky. Standing in the corridor, Seiya calmly declared that he wanted to meet with Asahina. Sue and Yui stared at Seiya in complete surprise, caught off guard by his sudden initiative. Sue closed his eyes and smiled warmly, encouraging Seiya to go ahead and do his absolute best. Yui hesitantly asked if they were going to hold a strategy meeting, but Sue casually dismissed the idea. Sue turned his gaze back to his friend, calling out Seiya's name with a serious expression. Sue warned him to make sure he left himself with absolutely no regrets, and Seiya calmly replied that he understood. Seiya took his first step forward to walk out of the room. He quietly announced that he was going as he opened and shut the door behind him. Yui watched him leave in silence and let out a surprised murmur while Sue smiled nearby. Yui asked Sue if it seemed like Seiya had changed just a little bit, and Sue warmly laughed in agreement. Yui grumbled about being left out of the loop, but Sue assured her it wasn't like that, pointing out that she was actually the main reason this had happened. When Yui asked in disbelief if that was really true, Sue firmly confirmed it. Yui stood in thoughtful silence for a moment. Yui softly acknowledged his words while Sue quietly watched her with a gentle gaze. Yui reflected on Seiya's mother's final words, wondering how much she truly meant them, but noting she must have had mixed feelings, silently concluding that if someone wanted to be happy, someone else had to suffer. Yui quietly called out Sue's name. Yui smiled gently and expressed her hope that everything would work out well for Seiya. Sue reflected that if a person had found someone they truly wanted to make happy, even if it meant putting up with a great deal of hardship, maybe that in itself was its own kind of happiness, and he realized that he felt the exact same way. The clouds drifted slowly across the morning sky. Seiya walked down the empty school corridor with a calm and determined expression. He walked purposefully toward his destination down the long hallway. Seiya kept moving forward, his fragile heart carrying both pain and a newfound determination. Seiya recalled Asahina's words about her upcoming move to America and how she would be leaving Japan very soon. Seiya focused his mind as he prepared to face the reality of her fast approaching departure. Asahina woke up in her bed to the loud, persistent beeping of her morning alarm. She sat up in bed, looking down solemnly as she prepared herself for the day ahead. Stepping out of bed, she dressed in her school uniform and quietly adjusted her ribbon. While staring blankly at her breakfast, She was startled when her maid addressed her as my lady. The maid concernedly asked if something was wrong, but Asahina weakly smiled and explained that she was only a little spaced out. She insisted that she was completely fine, though privately her thoughts began to trail off. Riding in the back of the car, she wondered if she was regretting her decision, telling herself that she ultimately had no other choice anyway. She stared out the window, realizing that she still found herself constantly thinking about Seiya. She reasoned that the woman she saw must have had her own reasons, telling herself she was being too suspicious of Seiya, just as her driver announced they had arrived. Standing by the school lockers, she reminded herself that today was her final day of school before moving to America, and that nothing could ever change that reality. She suddenly froze, her eyes widening in quiet shock at what she saw ahead. Gritting her teeth, she reached into her bag, quietly noting to herself that she was still doing this even after all this time. She took a purposeful step forward and made her way down the hallway. Her classmates happily called out to her as she passed, wishing her a good morning. Just as the classroom door closed, Seiya offered her a calm morning greeting, while Sue offered a casual hello beside him. Asahina smiled softly under her bangs and politely returned their morning greetings. As the loud school bell began to ring, a voice called out that class was about to start. The school bell continued to chime loudly, marking the start of her final day of classes. After classes ended, Asahina stepped out onto the quiet rooftop, holding her paper-wrapped bento bag tightly in her hand. She stood in silence as the gentle breeze blew through her hair, looking out over the empty rooftop. Asahina held a note from Seiya, which requested her to meet him on the rooftop at 5 o'clock after school. Looking up at the sky, she silently hoped that maybe things would not turn out so bad. During the final class, the teacher stood at the podium as Asahina bowed to her classmates, who immediately sent her off with polite applause. Asahina kept her gaze lowered, listening in silence as the clapping slowly faded away. Afterward, in the staff room, her teacher apologized for being unable to accompany her to the airport, but Asahina smiled and thanked him for the thought. Sliding the staff room door closed, she offered her silent thanks for everything her teachers had done for her. She resolved that there was now only one thing left for her to do. She slowly walked up the stairs to fulfill her final meeting before leaving the school. She slowly pushed open the heavy rooftop door, letting it creak open into the fresh air. Stepping outside, she found Seiya already waiting for her, standing quietly with his back turned. Seiya quietly turned his head as he heard her approach. Seiya calmly noted that she had made it, while Asahina stood a short distance away. Asahina immediately offered her apologies, explaining that she was a bit late. Seiya assured her he did not mind, noting that he was the one who had called her out of the blue, prompting Asahina to reply that he was being very kind. Observing Seiya's pale face, Asahina silently recalled the rumors about his family emergency before quietly calling out his name. She directly asked him if he was doing all right. Seiya quietly assured her that he was doing fine. Standing across from him, she silently acknowledged that this was her final day at the school. Knowing her time was almost up, she found her mind drifting back to everything that had happened between them ever since their first encounter. Seiya looked directly at her and confessed that he had been thinking about her words ever since that day. Seiya directly questioned why he was so incredibly fixated on her lunch. Asahina quietly acknowledged his words and asked if he had finally found the answer to that question. Seiya calmly confirmed that he had indeed found the answer. After a brief silence, Asahina closed her eyes and softly replied that she was glad to hear that. Seiya looked directly at her and prepared to continue his explanation. Asahina smiled gently and softly encouraged him to tell her the truth. In the beginning of the next chapter, Seiya reflected on his childhood, explaining that his entire world had once revolved around his mother, whom he loved dearly, and would do anything to make laugh. He recalled how much he had loved seeing his mother's happy face when she gently thanked him and promised to take good care of his handmade gift. Back in the present on the rooftop, Seiya d his past, while Asahina listened in silence. Seiya pointed out the similarity in their lives, noting that she had studied incredibly hard and taken many lessons just to gain recognition from her father. Clutching her skirt tightly, she silently acknowledged that she had spent her life striving to be the ideal student and the ideal daughter. Seiya explained that his mother had changed completely after the divorce. He recounted how his mother had stopped smiling and cried constantly, eventually becoming enraged whenever she saw his face and rarely coming home. Yet despite all of that, Seiya had desperately kept bringing home his earnings just to make his mother happy. He explained that he had only wanted his mother to love him again, and he had constantly searched for an answer on how to make that happen. He then recalled the lunch that Asahina used to eat alone in the classroom. Seiya remembered that her fingers had been covered in cuts back then, and asked why, to which Asahina quietly explained she had cut them while practicing with a kitchen knife. Seiya directly asked why she had gone through so much trouble to eat her own failed cooking in the classroom. Asahina stammered, caught completely off guard by his direct question. Asahina recalled the day she tried cooking at home for the very first time, remembering how she had struggled to measure out even a simple half-teaspoon of salt. She had wanted to prepare a surprise lunch to make her father happy, but she ended up cutting her fingers on the knife while preparing it. However, no matter how hard she tried, her cooking never turned out well, so she decided she could not possibly give it to her father and simply ate it for lunch herself. She explained that other people had gossiped and mocked her behind her back, which was why she originally thought Seiya's obsession with her lunch was just a cruel joke. She had wondered back then if her sense of taste had simply gone numb after failing so many times and making so much unpalatable food. But Asahina quietly realized that was not the true reason. She recalled how she had routinely opened her lunch in the classroom as if nothing were wrong. She confessed that she had simply not wanted to make her father feel uneasy or worried about the lunches she prepared. Asahina quietly tried to compose herself as the memory of her struggle weighed heavily on her. She had kept trying in her own clumsy way entirely for her father, prompting Seiya to reveal what he had felt when he first saw her lunches. Seiya confessed that it had been love at first sight for him, and that he simply could not take his eyes off her food. He explained that on the day of his childhood field trip, his mother had packed him a small 2-layered lunchbox filled with all of his favorite foods. On the day of his sports festival, she had packed so much food that he could not even finish it all, which had made him feel genuinely cared for and motivated him to do his best. He realized that those fond, distant memories were exactly what her lunches had reminded him of. Seiya looked directly at her and explained that this was the real reason why he had been so determined to eat her lunches. Asahina stared back at him in silence, deeply moved, as tears began to well up in her eyes. She knew that the only thing left for her to do now was to ask him one final question. She told herself that she had to say one more thing and ask him a question, so she quietly called out his name. With tears shining in her eyes, Asahina looked down and directly asked him if he liked her. Seiya remained completely silent, listening to her question under the vast sky. Asahina stood there with tears dripping from her face, her hand tightly gripping her skirt as she waited for his response. Seiya remained completely silent, looking back at her. Seiya admitted that he did not think he liked her. Asahina quietly murmured to herself, processing his rejection. Seiya kept looking at her in silence. Asahina confessed that despite everything she still wanted to like him. Seiya explained that no matter how injured her fingers got or how bad she was at cooking, a lunch prepared with all of one's heart for someone else was what truly mattered. Seiya revealed that he had fallen in love at first sight with that kind of effort and dedication. He recalled how a lunchbox was meant to make someone smile when they were tired and help them feel better. He remembered the childhood wish that his lunchbox would return empty and that he would come back home safely. Seiya stated that lunchboxes were ultimately all about love. Seiya confessed that just like a lunchbox, he simply wanted to feel loved by someone. Seiya directly declared that he wanted to like Asahina. He added that if anyone were to love him, he wanted it to be her. Asahina stared back at him with tears flooding her eyes. Seiya directly asked her to go out with him. Asahina wondered why he was so genuine, feeling an overwhelming urge to run up to him. Looking at the lonely person trembling in front of her, she desperately wanted to embrace him. However, she stopped herself before she could reach out. Asahina softly apologized to him, wishing for their bond to remain only as a memory. Asahina turned her back to Seiya and softly repeated her apology to him. Asahina stared straight ahead, tears continuing to blur her vision. She admitted to herself that she was absolutely terrified. She reflected that this was the very first time she had fallen in love, feeling herself change as if everything she previously cherished was suddenly about to disappear. She knew that his words were not lies, but she still could not bring herself to take the leap. Forcing a small smile through her tears, she repeated her apology once again. Seiya quietly looked down, absorbing her rejection as he acknowledged her decision. Seiya apologized for taking up her time and stated that was all he had wanted to discuss. He politely wished her the best of luck at her new school. Asahina quietly thanked him and offered her own wishes for his good luck in return. She softly bade him farewell, telling him goodbye. Seiya calmly agreed and said goodbye as well. As tears streamed down her face, she internally apologized to him once more. She felt deeply apologetic for how things had to end between them. Asahina turned and slowly walked away from the rooftop. Sue walked up to Seiya on the rooftop and immediately asked how the meeting had gone. Seiya calmly replied that it did not work out, prompting a concerned Sue to admit he had been worried, because Seiya was taking so long. Seiya quietly offered an apology to his friend. Sue asked if Seiya had managed to say everything he wanted to say, and when Seiya confirmed that he had done so, Sue warmly validated him. Seiya quietly noted that if things simply did not work out, then there was nothing more he could do about it. Sue asked him if he was really just going to leave it at that. When Seiya remained silent, a frustrated Sue demanded to know what he planned to do next, asking if he was seriously going to give up so easily. Seiya softly argued that he had already done everything he possibly could, but Sue immediately shouted back that he was entirely wrong. Sue angrily questioned how Seiya could possibly think he had done everything he could. Sue admitted he did not know if what he was saying was right or if it was already too late, but insisted that it did not matter. Sue pointed out that Seiya was not the type of person to back down easily, reminding him that he was the kind of idiot who persistently pushed forward no matter how much people mocked him. Sue asserted that if it were Seiya, then he was absolutely capable of making it happen. Sue forcefully grabbed Seiya by the collar and fiercely told him to stop being at other people's mercy forever. He urged Seiya to show Asahina that same stubborn persistence so that she would eventually sigh and stop giving up on him too. A stunned Seiya could only whisper Sue's name in response. Pressing his forehead against Seiya's shoulder, Sue weakly begged him to listen. Sue admitted that since he was also Asahina's friend, he absolutely hated seeing things end in such a miserable way. Seiya remained silent as Sue mumbled that this simply was not good enough. Seiya softly called his name and pointed out that it hurt, prompting an embarrassed Sue to release his grip and apologize. Seiya quietly addressed Sue again calmly, announcing that he was going to head out for a little bit. Seiya turned to leave, telling Sue that he would call him to ask for his help later. Sue watched his friend walk away, muttering in confusion about what Seiya was planning to do this time. Before leaving, Seiya softly confessed that he was truly glad to have Sue there by his side. Sue smiled softly as Seiya walked away. Sue internally agreed with Seiya's feelings watching him step out the door. Yui cheerfully waved to Sue as she approached him on the rooftop. Yui revealed that she had asked the teacher and learned Asahina would be leaving Japan the day after tomorrow, prompting a quiet acknowledgement from Sue. Yui jokingly complained that she had missed her best chance to take advantage of his depressed state to get him to take her out, and Sue sheepishly apologized to her. Sue turned and began walking away with a gentle smile on his face. Looking up at the sky, Sue suddenly remembered something from his past. He recalled a moment from his childhood when Seiya's mother had pulled him into a tight embrace. He remembered her tearfully begging him to protect Seiya like an older brother if she ever failed to be a good mother. Sue stood silently on the rooftop, hearing her past plea echo in his mind. Sue smiled warmly, silently promising her to leave Seiya in his care. Looking up at the cloudy sky, Sue internally told her not to worry about her wish. The school clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time. Sue impatiently tapped his finger on the desk as he yelled at someone not to put so much salt into the food. Sue shouted in exasperation, arguing that adding extra sugar would not cancel out the excess salt. Sue sighed in disbelief as Seiya and Yui continued cooking together in the kitchen. The scene shifted to several hours earlier when Seiya had directly asked Sue to teach him how to cook. Yui and Sue had both stared back at Seiya in complete stunned silence. Yui cheerfully asked if they should take turns keeping an eye on Seiya while he practiced his cooking. And Seiya politely thanked her for the help, though Sue reluctantly agreed, while internally groaning at the prospect of the chaotic cooking session. Sue turned back to watch them in the kitchen and immediately demanded to know what on earth they were doing as Seiya was firmly holding Yui's wrist while she tried to taste the food. Yui jokingly teased that she was being accused of harassing her senior under the guise of first aid, prompting Sue to push her away and take over while announcing that he was going to head out to handle a few errands anyway. Yui playfully teased that she would leave the two of them alone to have their own moment together, leaving Sue to huff in annoyance as she walked away. Seiya quietly raised his hands and stared down at his fingers. Sue concernedly pointed out that Seiya was pushing himself too hard and advised him to put on a bandage and rest. But Seiya firmly replied that they simply did not have enough time left. Seiya quietly thanked Sue for his help, and Sue reluctantly agreed to keep going, though he still reminded Seiya to put a bandage on his cut. Inside a building, the front door chimed loudly as a woman at the counter offered a polite welcome. A heavily panting Yui stood in the doorway, desperately calling out for her mother. Her mother was surprised to see her, since she did not have a work shift today, prompting Yui to catch her breath and explain that she had rushed over because she wanted to ask her mother for a huge favor. Her mother noted that it was highly unusual for Yui to ask her for anything, since she typically only relied on Seiya, prompting Yui to hesitantly begin explaining her request. With a deeply worried expression, Yui hesitantly requested an advance on her work salary. Her mother stared back at her in silence, quietly processing the sudden and unusual request. When her mother skeptically questioned why she wanted an advance just because she might need the money, Yui's eye twitched slightly in frustration. Yui tightly clenched her fist behind her back, admitting that, while she might not actually end up needing the money, she still wanted to be prepared. Yui firmly stated that she absolutely did not want to live with any regrets. With tears shining in her eyes, Yui added that she desperately did not want Seiya to live with any regrets either. Her mother quietly studied Yui's face and directly asked if she was doing all of this entirely for Seiya's sake. Yui remained completely silent in response. Yui insisted that she was only doing this for her own sake, but her mother sighed internally, noting that Yui was simply failing to be honest with herself. Her mother firmly declared that she did not give out salary advances under any circumstances, leaving a disappointed Yui to quietly acknowledge the rejection. As Yui turned to leave and apologized for taking up her time, her mother suddenly called out for her to wait and reached into her bag for a thick envelope of cash. Her mother handed her the envelope, explaining that since Yui had worked there for nearly 3 years, this was a milestone worth celebrating even if the timing was a bit unusual. When Yui hesitantly pointed out that there were still 6 months left until her milestone, her mother loudly told her not to sweat the small details before jokingly threatening to change her mind. Yui bowed deeply to express her immense gratitude as she accepted the envelope from her mother. Yui remembered Seiya's words about how a gift was a true token of sincerity to the person receiving it. Her mother recalled how Seiya had always bowed deeply and politely thanked her whenever he received his pay. She silently reflected on how earnest and honest Seiya had always been during his time working there. She fondly concluded that he was also incredibly clumsy. Watching Yui run off, her mother internally cheered them on, telling herself that both of them were truly good kids. Back in the kitchen, Seiya, Sue, and Yui stood together in quiet satisfaction. Seiya happily announced that his wrapped lunchbox was finally completely finished. Seiya bowed deeply and thanked them both for their help. But when he realized the trains were not running at this hour, and the earliest one would not get him to the airport in time, he began to panic. Yui proudly revealed that she had already called a taxi that would get him there in time, prompting Sue to loudly cheer her on. Seiya offered his sincere thanks to Yui, who looked up at him with a warm smile. Seiya announced that he was going to quickly change his clothes, while his friends urged him to hurry up. Outside, a voice called out that the taxi had already arrived, catching Sue and Yui by surprise at how quickly it had made it to the house. Sue asked Seiya why he had changed back into his school uniform, and Seiya calmly thanked both of his friends. Yui suddenly held out the envelope of cash and urged Seiya to use it, prompting a confused Seiya to ask what it was. Yui explained that she had gotten the money from her mother to help in case he was in need of something. She insisted that he should use it entirely on himself. Seiya gently pushed the envelope back and assured her that he was completely fine, suggesting instead that he should consider it a loan from her. Yui tearfully agreed, telling him that she did not care how long it took as long as he promised to return it to her someday. Seiya quietly accepted her condition and agreed to her terms. Seiya stepped into the taxi and drove away, leaving Sue and Yui standing together on the quiet street. Sue called out to Yui and noted that she had really gone out of her way to get that money for him. Yui quietly agreed, explaining that even if Seiya had said he was going with Asahina, she wanted to make sure he had a way back just in case things did not work out. Yui clenched her jaw in silence as Sue looked at her with a soft expression. Sue directly asked Yui if she was truly doing all right with all of this. Yui quietly murmured that this would not change the special bond she had with Seiya. Sue quietly acknowledged her words, rubbing the back of his neck in silence. Sue gently patted her on the shoulder and warmly remarked that she was actually pretty cool. The airport check-in counter was filled with the loud chatter of busy travelers as Chapter 22 began. Asahina stood in the busy airport, looking around downcast as travelers chatted all around her. She sat quietly on the airport seats, surrounded by the constant bustle and chatter of busy travelers. She stared blankly at the crowd, wondering who or what she was still holding out hope to find. She knew that all her belongings were securely packed in her suitcase, yet she could not shake the feeling that something incredibly important was missing. Her attendant approached and gently informed her that it was time to head to the boarding gate, prompting Asahina to quietly agree and stand up to leave. As she walked, her eyes suddenly widened in shock when she heard a voice call out her name. She turned around, telling herself that there was no way it could be him, only for a hand to suddenly grab her firmly by the shoulder. She gasped in disbelief to see Seiya standing there, heavily out of breath, telling her that he had finally managed to find her. Asahina stood in complete shock, desperately wondering why Seiya was here at the airport. She asked him why he had come all this way wearing his school uniform and carrying his bag. Seiya, catching his breath, explained that, because bidding her farewell was a deeply important matter to him, he had decided he must wear his formal school uniform. Asahina quietly digested his words as Seiya tightly clenched his fist in front of her. Seiya admitted that from the moment of his very first confession right up until this day, simply being together with her had brought him immense happiness. Seiya softly offered his warmest wishes for her absolute best in her future. Asahina quietly thanked him, internally realizing that if she were to say even 2 or 3 more words to him right now, everything would completely fall apart. She bid him farewell, internally wishing for his well-being but silently crying out that she still desperately wanted to speak with him. While she internally screamed that she still wanted to be with him, Seiya suddenly called out her name. Seiya reached into his bag, telling her that he had one final thing he wanted to give her. He held out a beautifully wrapped lunchbox, gently telling her that he had made a lunch especially for her. Seiya softly called her name, expressing his hope that everything would go well for her over there. He added his sincere hope that the food would always make her smile even when she was tired and help her feel better. Asahina slowly reached out her hands and accepted the lunchbox from him. Seiya silently prayed for her safety, wishing that she would return home safely someday. Looking down with tears streaming down her face, she realized that lunchboxes really were all about love. She held the wrapped box tightly as Seiya slowly withdrew his hand. Asahina gently asked him to take off his gloves, and when he hesitantly started to object, she firmly insisted that it was all right and begged him to do it anyway. Seiya slowly pulled off his glove, revealing his fingers completely covered in band-aids and cuts from practicing his cooking. Asahina tearfully called him an idiot for coming all this way, prompting a quiet agreement from Seiya, as she added that he was completely crazy, which Seiya calmly acknowledged. She fondly teased him, calling him a womanizer and a lunch maniac, while noting how bad he was at cooking compared to her own struggles. She reflected that even if she ended up getting hurt or regretting it someday, her feelings remained unchanged. As she turned to walk away, she suddenly stopped her footsteps and called out to him. Suddenly breaking down, Asahina sobbed uncontrollably as she profusely apologized to Seiya for treating him so cruelly. She wept loudly, confessing that she liked him and desperately did not want to leave him behind. While travelers watched in silence, Seiya pulled her into a tight, comforting embrace, gently patting her on the back as she continued to weep. Seiya then gently placed his hands on her shoulders and pushed her back a little. Seiya firmly told her that she had to go if she wanted to continue following her own path. Seiya added that if it was for her happiness, he was entirely willing to be patient. He promised that he would always be right there thinking about her, which brought a tearful smile of relief to her face. He gently pleaded with her to smile, and she tearfully nodded in response. Asahina softly called his name and earnestly declared that she would absolutely return back to this place. With a bright, tearful smile, she vowed that she would absolutely come back to see him again. Seiya smiled warmly and promised her that he would be waiting for her return. The two of them did a final quiet smile together as she wiped her remaining tears away. Suddenly, Yui and Sue caught up with them at the gate, panting heavily, as Sue admitted they couldn't just wait around after seeing Seiya rush off. Yui loudly argued that Sue had actually dragged her there by force, despite how upset she had been feeling. While Seiya grumbled about what a pain they were, Asahina burst out laughing, noting that Seiya did not actually look like he minded their intrusion at all. Standing side by side with them, Asahina warmly noted that Seiya really was quite weird. Shortly after, the airplane finally took off into the sky, carrying her toward her new home. Inside the airplane cabin, the overhead controls remained dimly lit as the flight progressed. Sitting by the window, Asahina carefully untied the white cloth on her tray table to open the lunchbox Seiya had given her. Opening the lid, she stared down in complete stunned surprise at what was inside. The lunchbox was sealed with a cute little cat sticker in the corner. Smiling warmly, she could easily picture all the clumsy, earnest efforts Seiya must have put into preparing the meal for her. Inside the lunchbox was a neatly arranged meal of rice, rolled omelets, sausages, and cherry tomatoes. Asahina picked up a piece with her chopsticks and took a bite, chewing in quiet contemplation. Smiling warmly through her tears, she finished every last bite of the empty lunchbox and softly murmured that it really did not taste very good. Asahina sat peacefully in her seat, looking down at the empty box with a gentle, happy expression.